Chapter 355. If it wasn't for the fact that Little Red was far too familiar with Roland, she probably wouldn't have been able to recognize him. Roland was wearing a set of bright red battle armor that seemed to be composed of countless tiny scales and accessories. His wrists, knee pads, waist, and leg pads all had additional dragon scale armor pieces. However, there were no traces of them connecting to each other, as if they were natural. The armor that covered Roland's entire body was quite similar to that of dragons. On his left shoulder was an angrily roaring crimson dragon head, while on his right shoulder was a dragon claw that held a dragon ball. When Roland put on a helmet decorated with dragon head decorations, he could only see a pair of shining eyes in a black abyss. The armor's material was like ice, yet it was as red as blood. There was even a faint blood-red heat flowing around the armor. The dragon eyes on the armor were flashing, and even the dragon runes that covered the entire body were flashing. The entire armor seemed to be a living creature that was breathing. The armor was designed to look like a roaring demon dragon, and it even had its own draconic might. Just looking at it would make anyone feel uncomfortable. The most flashy part was that this armor, which was already ridiculous enough, was also specially paired with a bright red cape. Dragon Scale Ice Armor, the Guardian of Eternal Night. System Evaluation, Legendary, can grow. This armor is constructed from the eternal ice of an ancient dragon's bloodline in another world. There are special inscriptions on it, and the soul of the item, Irene Bela, resides within it. The user is limited to Roland himself. Titan's Thunder Metal. This armor has legendary level damage reduction. 30/God equipment. Any damage dealt by any weapon below the level of God equipment will be reduced by 30 points. System notification. You actually embedded a shard of a Titan's shield into your armor to increase its defense. Only you could think of something like this. Living armor. This armor is alive. She can repair damage on her own. She can even help you use the power of the dragon bloodline. However, if you accidentally anger her, do you still remember the pitiful little girl in the fairy tale who couldn't take off her magical dancing shoes and dance to death? In fact, if Irene Bela wanted to mess with you, she didn't have to go to this extent. She only needed to make sure that you couldn't take off your armor and go to the toilet. Ein Mises Protection. The dragon's bloodline flows within the armor. She is protecting the wearer of the armor. However, this isn't good news for the attacker. After all, this means that the wearer has to absorb at least 100 points of damage per day in order to be able to deal any damage to the wearer. This ability will automatically repair itself within 24 hours. Dragon Follower. I really can't believe this attribute would appear on an armor, but you've done it. The wearer can use various Dragon Follower abilities through this armor. Eternal Knight's Authority. Due to the uniqueness of its material, no ice damage will be able to lower its temperature below 0 degrees Celsius. In other words, it is an existence that is almost immune to ice. Due to her ancient red dragon bloodline, fire damage is halved and the lowest damage is reduced by 30 points. Curse of Blood Armor. If the wearer isn't Roland, this armor will spit out blood-sucking needles that will transform the wearer into a dry corpse. That's right, this armor was a product of evolution. When my bloodline evolved, I set my sights on Harlois and Irene Bela. From a certain standpoint, as my contracted frigid maw, Irene Bela was basically my soul's other half. However, in the recent battles, she was unable to keep up with the situation. This wasn't because Frigid Maw wasn't strong enough. The Aurora Knight, which was at the lowest gold rank, would forever be the pride of the Northlands. The monster-level Frigid Maw from the Great Snowy Mountains would definitely be no weaker than an ancient red dragon. However, due to my soul contract with me, and the fact that we were currently on a far too dangerous battlefield, the Frigid Maw and Irene Bela were indeed unable to do much due to my upper limits. A gold-ranked Ice Pegasus or Ice Dragon would probably only serve as a means of transportation on a battlefield where semi-god and myth-ranked existences were everywhere. If I rode on Irene Bela while charging, it would likely be quite likely that I would die on the way. Not only that, I also had the ability to fly after transforming, and I loved riding on engineering vehicles when I had nothing better to do, so I didn't need a mount at all. Most of the time, Irene Bela's greatest assistance to me was to help me control my ice magic and become my secondary magic core, rather than actually fighting on the battlefield. Irene Bela was also aware of this situation. That was why, even though she didn't successfully fight on the battlefield in the end, she didn't complain at all. Originally, Frigid Maw also had the ability to create an ice sword and ice armor for her master. However, as I improved, this ability was replaced by Harlois' magic sword and absolute zero ice armor. As the other half of my soul, this time's power level advancement was doubtlessly an opportunity for both of us. Even if Irene Bela was strengthened, she would still be restricted from reaching the legend rank before I truly reached the legend rank. At most, she would be able to preserve her potential and gain a few more dragon bloodline skills. But to be honest, that would be useless. When I saw Harlois, I thought about how her growth-type ice magic sword would greatly improve my combat abilities, and I had an idea. Indeed, contract creatures, mounts, and magical pets can't surpass their masters. This is one of the basic rules of the mortal plane. However, weapons and equipment are independent existences, and don't have such a restriction. Irene Bela already has the Ice Dragon transformation ability. If she obtained a true dragon bloodline, she would be able to control it completely on her own. As for the ability to transform, no matter if it's Irene Bela's own ability to create ice weapons or Harlois' information, it's theoretically possible. Of course, many things were theoretically possible. However, it was ridiculously difficult to actually do so. Changing a creature's body structure out of thin air was already at the level of the creator goddesses. However, I wouldn't be able to do such a level of transformation. My current skill level was only at the level of creating the coldest ice or something inorganic. At most, I could just copy some creature to create something similar, but I was unable to do such a thing. Although I can't do it, my system can. That's right, my physical body creation ability only required 2 potions of blood and fate points to create this body with limitless potential. In that case, it should be possible for me to create a body for Irene Bela as well. Alright then, everyone knew the rest. Of course my system could do it, but the result was that my system took away all of my fate points and made me owe a huge debt. Roland missed. Strength 34, plus 10. Agility 24, Constitution 25, Intelligence 32, Will 22, Charm 20. Natural talents: War Angel form, Original Sin Demon form, Titan Blood, Gaze of the Hell God. Basic job class: Level 60 Order Knight / Level 60 Chaos Witch King / Level 10 4 Elemental Swordcasters. Advanced job class: Level 6 Master of Winter. Overall level cannot be evaluated. Magical pet: Harlois. Mount / armor: Irene Bela. As expected, the increase in attributes this time was small. Strength increased by 2 points, agility by 2 points, stamina by 3 points, intelligence by 2 points, willpower by 2 points, and charisma by 1 point. Although it didn't seem like a big increase, but because the base was already very high, every point of growth was extremely difficult to achieve. This increase in attributes this time was already a very good harvest. The only thing that broke through my bottleneck was my originally useless charm stat, which made me rather worried. I could only hope that I wouldn't awaken any strange abilities. But considering my system's usual behavior, it probably wouldn't let me off so easily, so I could only do my best to not think about it. As for natural talents, I now only had 4 of my originally ridiculously powerful racial talent. Although they seemed much weaker, they were actually greatly strengthened. Originally, these two types of transformation abilities were called incarnations. They both had a time limit so that my physical body, which was still in its infancy, wouldn't be overly burdened. But now they had become forms. This meant that I could transform into my regular combat strength with a single thought. The only difference was that the duration of the transformation had greatly increased. This was truly a great improvement. Since I had considered the demonic characteristics of the original Sin Demon God incarnations, I had always used the War Angel incarnation in the human world. Now that I had a full set of armor, as long as I put on a mask, I could freely use both forms as I pleased. My Shadow Feet and Order Sword had already been cancelled, so there was no need to mention them. However, my three extremely practical natural talents, Titan's Torso, Divine Child, and Chaos Barrier, were gone as well. They seemed to have been combined into a seemingly ordinary name, Titan's Bones. My previous two major talents were super practical. Titan's Torso, Diamond Racial Talent. Your physical body contains the primordial power of the Titans. Your skin is becoming more and more like Titan metal. Reduce all damage and negative effects by 30%. Reduce all damage by 5 points. Chaos Barrier, Gold Racial Talent. Protect your own existence from the pressure of divine territory and soul world. Reduce the effectiveness of will-type abilities and illusions. However, the newly obtained racial talent seemed to be a combination of both. Titan's Bones. Host's body contains the bloodline of the first Titans. Your bones and skin will be similar to that of a pure Titan. Reduce all damage and negative effects by 50%. Host will be immune to semi-god rank and above mental abilities and control magic. As long as your feet are on the ground in battle, your physique and strength will gradually increase. Your stamina will gradually recover, and your injuries will gradually heal. To be honest, when I saw this talent, I really wanted to comment on my system for taking the Titan's bones from you. However, when I thought about the Titan's broken teeth that went missing after the battle, I decided that it was better not to ask about some things. If the system really told me that the broken teeth came from the Titan giants, I would probably be so disgusted that I wouldn't be able to eat for several days. As for the missing Divine Child talent, I asked my system about it. The gist of it was that when your physical body evolved to such a degree, you would be able to complete a god's descent even without the assistance of this talent. The system evaluation, as you wished for, the perfect meat shield. You have given the dragon vein to Irene Bela for safekeeping so that you can evolve even further. Of course, I doubt that you're the happiest about this. Yep, the increase in power wasn't what I cared about the most. What made me the happiest was that I had finally grown up. I think I was around 3 years old. Originally, I had the Arbiter bloodline in my infancy, so no matter how I looked, I didn't look more than 10 years old. Now, I seemed to have entered my youth phase, which meant that I was around 11 or 12 years old. Although I still needed a ring to adjust my physical appearance, I was now a little boy with some hair. No matter how I looked, I was much better than a little brat who couldn't do anything at all. And so, I proudly dispelled my armor and revealed my true form as Little Red walked over to me. Although I was still slightly shorter than Little Red, I wasn't too far off. Yep, I was only half a meter away from her. Roland? What happened to your dragon vein? Why do I sense that you're even weaker than before? Was I even weaker than before? In a way, that was indeed the case. Irene Bela originally didn't have a physical body. The system hadn't created one out of thin air. The bloodline power that Irene Bela lacked was absorbed from me. I would need time to replenish the flesh and blood that I had lost. Although my stats would increase again, it would likely take a long time to recover. Dragon Vein? I gave it to Irene Bela. That's the ability to transform into armor. Heh, you don't know this, but this time, your dragon blood really helped me tremendously. You must be feeling terrible after being cooped up for so many days. Come, I'll treat you to some drinks. Right, this body of yours hasn't reached adulthood yet. It'll take several decades before it reaches maturity, and I can't even drink alcohol yet. Forget it, it doesn't matter. Let's go to the bar. I was so happy that I couldn't even speak coherently. But the strange thing was that even though Little Red heard that I was treating her to a drink, she should have happily dragged me away in the past. But this time, the more I spoke, the more Little Red's expression kept changing. Her red dragon form's face became redder and redder, indicating that she was either excited or furious. Just as I was wondering what was wrong with her, a gigantic fist suddenly appeared in front of me. You number one idiot in the world! Let me see what color your brain is. Although it was a surprise attack, how could it possibly stop me, who had just finished my closed-door training? The current me already had enemies in the world. That was close. I almost said something like a death flag. Asterisk bang. Asterisk my reaction wasn't slow either. My mystical armored arm successfully blocked the heavy blow. With the buffs and support of my armor, I only took half a step back to block Little Red's monstrous attack of at least 35 strength. This meant that with the buffs from my various defensive abilities, I was probably about the same level as a mini-titan giant. Ha, you want to test my current strength? How impatient. Come, let's have a good fight. I guarantee that you'll be satisfied. Although Little Red was currently in human form, I was quite proud of myself for being able to block an immemorial dragon's brute strength. I immediately intended to summon an ice blade and use actual combat to test my current strength, but, damn it, Little Red, why did you transform into your dragon form? Why are you so angry? Dragon breath? Are you for real? I only intended to have a competition with you in human form. You idiot. My plans have all gone up in smoke. It took me so much effort to make up my mind. I already threw caution to the wind, but you actually dared to embarrass me and make me say such shameful words. Are you even a man? If you're a man, let me spit and bite you. What? If you bite me, I'll be dead for sure. I had an innocent expression on my face as I was astonished by Little Red's anger. However, this only made Little Red even angrier out of embarrassment. All right then, if Little Red still remembered that Roland was still in his infant form, and that dragons, with such a powerful bloodline, would only be able to reproduce after reaching adulthood, she probably would have known that her plan would have been impossible to succeed from the very start. Of course, if she had learned from a certain town security dog and had enough patience, it would have been possible for her to have a 10-year Shota training plan. But now, thinking back to what she had said in front of Molly, the berserk red dragon's heart was filled with anger and embarrassment. She had completely entered a berserk state, and there was no logic left in her. Dragon breath 3 times in a row? Metal knuckles for dragons? Fine, I'll show you my backbone, War Angel. You're breaking the rules. How can I be attacked while I'm transforming? You should at least let me finish the transformation animation. I hate this feeling. Just as I was about to spread my wings and soar into the sky, the flustered and exasperated Little Red punched me and sent me flying into the sky like a shooting star. When she discovered that I was now tough enough, the furious Little Red started using her female privilege, venting her anger on me. Asterisk bang. Asterisk the additional dragon breath caused the meteor in the sky to turn into firework. However, from the energetic. I'll be back. In terms of shouting, the effects of this armor were really good. In the end, only Little Red, who was panting heavily, glanced at her surroundings. The aftermath of her dragon breath was scorching the ground. Her gigantic body was causing the nearby buildings to shake and even collapse just by causing an earthquake. At this moment, everyone in the distance was looking at the red dragon in fear. It seemed that after this incident, Little Red's reputation as an evil dragon would never be washed away. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw another target of her anger. Molly, who was tightly bound and crawling away like a caterpillar. And so Little Red laughed. Alright then, what followed next was probably her daily routine of eating, sleeping, and beating up Molly. Chapter 356. By the time I completed my super zombie level evolution, it had already been 1 week since the war started. Why was it called super zombie level evolution? Why did I feel that this choice would be so zombie-like? Compared to riding on a young girl and wielding a young girl, only someone who was wearing a young girl and holding a young girl, I suddenly discovered that I was missing a mount. Should I go find another young girl? Mr. Police, it's that person. Cough, cough, let's forget about the topic of zombies. The chaotic battle between the gods ended in front of everyone's eyes. However, the gods' retreat actually made the situation even more chaotic. Many changes became more and more obvious as time passed. For the living, victory in the Holy War was obviously a good thing. That's right, it was the Holy War. Considering the current situation, the Bardi Church's Holy Light Bishop, who was stationed in the Mage Country, unhesitatingly took all the glory of victory for himself after communicating with Pope Roland. The inconceivable battle report stated that the Holy War's vanguard had actually traveled across most of Bardi and suddenly appeared in the western part of the country, attacking the undead's capital. Alright, I knew that this was bad. For example, the Bardi Church actually had an Archbishop of Holy Light. Even though he was supposed to be an Archbishop of Bardi, he ran off to the Mage Country. Also, there was a Holy War's vanguard who suddenly created a major spatial transfer and obtained a victory that shouldn't have existed in a place that shouldn't have existed. To be honest, this was actually quite easy to understand. When the Holy Church was exiled from Bardi, the Holy Church's local faction finally chose to take command of the Holy Church outside of Bardi's borders. The most suitable place to take command of the Holy Church was naturally the Mage Country, since it wasn't difficult for the Holy Church to travel to and from Bardi. This was especially so since Bardi and Bardi were still at war. Even if an enemy's enemy wasn't a friend, it was still possible for them to become friends. No matter how much the Holy Church was ostracized by the Bardi government, the Holy Church was still a mainstream religion. Even ordinary farmers would thank the Holy Light when they harvested their crops, although no one knew what they were thanking the Holy Light for. Of course, if they were so unlucky that they didn't harvest anything, they would still say things like, "This blind Holy Light," or "Cursed Holy Light." Even if the weather was terrible, they would say things like, "This damned Holy Light," even if they didn't know what the Holy Light had done wrong. I suddenly felt that the Holy Light was quite pitiful. The fact that the Holy Light was constantly being criticized reminded me of the government. No matter what country or species it was, it seemed that ever since the concept of a country was born, the government and country's duty was to receive criticism and complaints. No matter if the government did or didn't do such a thing, or how much they did or didn't do such a thing, it was only natural for ordinary citizens to complain and scold the government every day. Cough, cough, getting back to the topic, this was actually a good thing for the Holy Church. Shallow believers would still be believers, and they would still be able to provide the Holy Church with the power of faith. The fact that everyone was praising the Holy Light proved just how deeply rooted the Holy Light was. If this was a normal country that worshipped the Holy Light, then when the Pope announced that he was going to start a holy war against the domain lords and rulers, the domain lords would probably have to be careful of the large numbers of rebellious believers in their territories, while the rulers would have to be careful of the assassinations of the devout nobles. Orlos was already quite amazing. He had been doing his best to eliminate the Holy Light's influence ever since he had inherited the throne. However, he had only been in power for less than half a century, and there hadn't been any new generations. Even he wouldn't believe that he had truly eliminated the power of Holy Light. That was why this exiled church, with the Orthodox Bardi Empire's Holy Light Church, also gave the Bardi government quite a bit of trouble. Originally, the mages didn't really like the Holy Church, but they still took in these Holy Church priests. This was probably purely to annoy Bardi's Emperor Orlos. But after taking them in, the Bardi government didn't bother with them. Unfortunately, as the exiled church leaders, who were supposed to be on the same side as the emperor, the mage country ignored their requests to send an army to the Bardi Empire's borders dozens of times. Cardinal Stephen of a mega-empire should have had a high position of authority, but he seemed to have discovered that if this new news spread in the Bardi Empire and allowed the situation to continue worsening, his political career would come to an end. He would likely become the shortest-serving cardinal in history. This new news was that the Holy Church's expeditionary army had lost the Holy War. The Holy Church had lost the first battle in this Holy War. Yes, they had lost. While the battles on the western battlefront were still ongoing, the Holy Army, which had been fighting against Emperor Orlas's heresy, had suffered heavy losses on the eastern battlefront under the command of the veteran General Gordon, who was ranked 7th on the famous general's rankings. The reason? In front of the enraged dragons, a berserk immemorial black dragon, 3 immemorial dragons, and more than 40% of the Holy War's Holy Army had been able to successfully retreat in front of the furious dragons with the help of a berserk immemorial black dragon and 3 immemorial dragons. Not only did this mean that the Holy War's Holy War didn't intend to kill them all, it also showed how amazing Gordon was. Outsiders would find it difficult to understand the dragon's actions. But for us who knew the inside story, it wasn't difficult to guess the reason. It was quite obvious that the Holy War's Holy War had made some sort of deal with Orlas. And so, the dragons once again displayed their unique talent for venting their anger on others and being unreasonable, viciously slapping the Holy Church in the face. Actually, this wasn't an injustice. The Holy War's target was the Bardi capital, and the entrance to Dragon World was also located there. If the Holy War's Dragon World had been conquered by the Holy War, fine then, from certain information, it was possible that the Holy Church had been seeking death. But it was obvious that the Holy Church hadn't learned of this secret before the Holy War began. I felt that this wasn't a coincidence. After all, the Holy Church's declaration of war had been quite sudden. Orlas's response was even more incomprehensible. It seemed that he hadn't organized any allied armies specifically to fight against the Holy War's Dragon World. Instead, he had focused all of his energy on defending Nitrain City on the western battlefront. Orlas's policy of allowing the Holy War's Dragon World to be attacked without resisting caused tremendous pressure from the Bardi Empire. But judging from the end result, our noblest, holy light and wisest Pope Bardi had once again been played by a mortal heretic emperor. Orlas was willing to let his own country be ravaged by the enemy in order to successfully force the dragons to attack. Originally, the Holy Church would have been able to endure such losses. Victory and defeat were common occurrences in war. Heroes could simply start over. But it just so happened that the westernmost battlefront had actually won. And it just so happened that the Ale faction was faintly becoming the Holy Light faction's #1 competitor. This naturally gave the Holy Church a tremendous amount of pressure. And it just so happened that in both battles, the Holy Church's armies had holy favorites who sought holy points, while the Holy Light faction also had contract heroes who sought justice points. Both sides met with nearly impossible to defeat. One side had the Holy Light faction personally holding the line, while their subordinates earned large amounts of justice points. On the other side, the Holy Light faction's subordinates suffered heavy casualties, and the Holy Light faction didn't even get to see the Holy Light faction. This couldn't be blamed on the Holy Light faction's true gods for not doing anything. This was how they had been doing for thousands of years. Casually sending a true god to interfere in a battle between mortals would actually be a huge taboo. The Ale faction had only personally intervened because they discovered that the Holy Light faction was an incarnation of the Titan giant. However, ordinary people wouldn't think so much. They would only feel that the Holy Light faction didn't treat mortals as humans. Meanwhile, the Ale faction had made its stance clear. The adventurers who were currently showing off their spoils of war and returning home in glory were the most successful advertisements for the Holy Light faction. In just this week alone, 10% of the holy favorites have already chosen to withdraw from the Holy Light faction. This is absolutely unacceptable. The local believers, especially those who are still hiding in the Bardi Empire, will have their faith shaken. If news of us losing the first battle spreads, all the believers in the world will lose faith in us. We must win the first battle, even if it's a false victory. And so, after Cardinal Stephen urgently contacted the Holy Light Church and discovered that it would be the end for him if things continued like this, Cardinal Stephen gritted his teeth and made a decision. A battle report with the words, "Under the protection of the Holy Light, our brave warriors have achieved a great victory," was sent to every country in the Bardi Empire. The words used in this report were quite vague, such as "devout believers of the Holy Light have defeated the undead army on the western battlefront, and driven away 2 powerful incarnations of the Titan giants." From a certain standpoint, many adventurers believed in the Holy Light. Some holy knights and holy light priests had also participated in this battle. It couldn't be said that Stephen was lying. It was just that his battle report seemed to have forgotten about the original main characters, the Ale faction and the contract heroes. Nobody was an idiot. Every royalty would have their own sources of information. But when Pope Coloma insisted that this battle report was the truth, many countries that believed in the Holy Light fell silent. As a cardinal who lied through his teeth, Stephen was destined to leave his name in the annals of history. He had also mentally prepared himself to be martyred because of this. He knew that even if Pope Coloma privately approved of this plan, he wouldn't openly admit it. It was highly likely that Stephen would be the scapegoat in the end. Everyone who knew the truth was laughing at the Holy Church. Many powerful individuals felt ashamed of the Holy Church's behavior. But in this generation, information spread to ordinary people was incredibly slow. Ordinary people had pitifully few sources of information, and official channels of communication were slow and inefficient. If a well-respected village priest or church priest said something like this, most people would believe it. At the very least, they would be more trustworthy than wandering adventurers. In the eyes of those who didn't know the truth, it seemed like the Holy Church had achieved a great victory in the First Holy War and that the losses on the eastern battlefront were insignificant. But in the eyes of those who knew the truth, especially the royalty of the various countries, it seemed like the Holy Church was only strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Many ambitious individuals were itching to try. The battle between royalty and divine authority would never end. The Holy War was both a challenge and an opportunity. According to certain information, some major countries had already requested their subordinate countries to expel the Holy Church. This was an attempt to provoke the Holy Church, as well as a test of the Holy Church's reaction speed and bottom line. And so, this small battle on the Western battlefront was doubtlessly the best opening battle of the Holy War. On one hand, the Holy War had become a lever to change the entire world. On the other hand, it had become a sharp blade hanging over the Holy Church's head that could fall at any moment. When I finally finished my closed-door meditation, I was in disbelief. So many things had happened in just 1 week, and the important matters waiting for me to deal with were piling up like a mountain. Chapter 357. Has the Holy Church been forced to such a state? When I learned of a certain person's shameless actions, I wasn't angry at all. In fact, I was quite happy. Sometimes, being in the lead was equivalent to being the victor. For example, a leader who had more than 80% of the market share would have a hard time catching up as long as they didn't take too big of a risk or make a major mistake. For a behemoth like the Holy Church, there was a limit to how much external pressure it could receive. As long as there weren't any internal conflicts, the Holy Church would probably be able to survive for several hundred years. This time, the Holy Church finally made a mistake, and a major one at that. I could understand that the Holy Church's decision wasn't necessarily the wrong one given the current situation. In fact, since the Holy Church had such a solid foundation, it was actually an excellent decision. The Holy Church had the advantage of public opinion, so of course they could do whatever they wanted. From this, it could be seen that things had been going smoothly for them for far too long, and they felt that their position wouldn't be challenged at all. In fact, they were even looking down on the Ale faction. The Holy Church's higher-ups probably only wanted to use this battle report to stabilize the situation for now. After this period of time, when the Holy War entered a stalemate, not only would the other countries still remember this, they might even request help from the Holy Church due to the war's unfavorable situation. And even if this incident was brought up in the future, the battle achievement announcement was written ambiguously to begin with. The main point of the announcement was that it was a victory under the guidance of the Holy Light. Since most people in this world believed in the Holy Light, this statement couldn't be said to be wrong. It was entirely possible to use a typo to deny it. And if the Holy Church was forced into a disadvantageous position, people would use this as a weakness against them. At that time, they could simply say that Cardinal Stephen was worried that the war's unfavorable situation would affect his future, so he lied to the Holy Church and deceived the higher-ups. He was stripped of his position and committed suicide on XX Mountain. Such an explanation would suffice. Cardinal Stephen was already dead, and the Holy Church had taken the blame. Actually, such things had happened many times already. As long as someone took the blame and the tree didn't fall, the Holy Church could only leave the matter unsettled. What the Holy Church needed right now was to do their best to reduce the negative effects of the first battle and increase the Holy Light faction's morale. Of course, it would be even better if they could eliminate the Ale faction's existence. However, there was one thing that even the Pope himself did not see, and this was the biggest mistake. He had underestimated the contract heroes and even completely ignored their existence. In this incident, the greatest victims weren't me, Oaktown's Wood Spirits, or even ALS faction. We didn't need to prove our own abilities to the world, and there would be plenty of opportunities to prove ourselves. We didn't need to care about the glory of this battle. However, for the contract heroes who had risked their lives to make a name for themselves and gain glory, this epic battle had already changed their lives. Their shining military medals were still pinned to their chests, but the trophy that was already in their hands had been snatched away. If they bragged about it to others in the future, they might even be treated as scammers. This was a fatal pain for those youths who believed that honor was more important than their lives. Perhaps they would remember these hypocritical villains for the rest of their lives. At the very least, the clergy had been treated with enmity by other adventurers in the past few days. There were even a few young clergy who had chosen to serve the gods they were supposed to serve. The Pope and the cardinals had gotten used to being high above everyone else, but they had forgotten that the scariest part about humans was their ability to grow. Perhaps they were only noobs who had a low social status. But once the justice points helped them grow, when the first batch of newcomers became veterans of this profession, and when they used the power they obtained from the Holy Light's military achievement system to stand out in various places, these hidden bombs and unshakable hatred would truly take effect. Actually, in the near future, the third rule that the veterans of the Holy Light would give to the young noobs was, perhaps you can trust the clergy who truly believe in the Holy Light, but the Holy Church is a bunch of old bastards. Never leave your back to them. Otherwise, they'll steal the glory that should belong to you and burn you alive as a heretic. You don't believe me? Think about Oaktown. And once hatred was established at the very beginning, it would be difficult to reverse it no matter how much one did. Of course, the Holy Church's own Holy Night system would be more than enough. How could they possibly think about the effect this competing, contract heroes system would have on the world, and whether or not the young noobs would become true heroes? Of course, even though we all knew what was going on and were quite satisfied with such an ending, it would be impossible for us to do nothing. Even though our Ale faction was indeed weaker than the Holy Light faction, we had already been attacked. If we didn't take revenge, wouldn't that make us seem too weak? And in this world, weakness was a sin in and of itself. Weakness would cause the wolves around us to lower their guard and truly begin their ambush. What does Ale intend to do? Or has he already done something? At such a time, it was naturally time for our boss to make a decision. In my mind, Ale wasn't someone who was used to swallowing insults and insults. 2 meteors have fallen from the sky over the past few days. Although the Holy Church hasn't made any public announcements, the small churches of the God of Discipline and the God of Punishment haven't received any response from their true God. Their priests have also lost their divine power. Although these 2 gods don't have much of a presence, and are only mortals who ascended to become quasi-gods, they were both follower gods of the god of asceticism, Tiamat. You should understand why they silently perished. In ancient myths, meteors were also a sign that a god had fallen. But actually, a meteor might not necessarily be a god's death, but a god's death would definitely result in a meteor. Yep, it was actually a scene where a god's divine kingdom and divine throne were ablaze as they fell from the sky. Anyone who witnessed such a scene would instinctively know that a god had died. It was just like how the entire world would know if someone ascended to godhood. I had never even heard of these 2 gods before. I only learned that they were semi-gods who successfully became god envoys of the Holy Church in the past. They then swore loyalty to the true gods and became follower gods who shared their divine concepts and divine power. Their churches were all located within the Holy Church. The God of Discipline would provide heretical judges with divine arts to track down heretics, while the God of Punishment was a master of torture and interrogation. Both of these gods were incredibly weak gods, and they were completely Tiamat's lackeys, while Tiamat was the God of Holy Light's lackey. I heard that, fine, at least on the surface, this incident was caused by the powerful God of asceticism. His teachings advocate a masochistic lifestyle. He believes that if everyone is thrifty and poor, there won't be any conflicts in the world. He believes that he should wear simple clothing in winter to strengthen his body, and he should eat rice and drink cold water in summer to improve himself through asceticism. Although Tiamat is quite famous among the warrior monks, his teachings are naturally the mortal enemy of Baena, who seeks wealth to improve her lifestyle. Of course, the Holy Light bastards are the ones who spread the rumor that this incident was caused by Tiamat himself. I feel like the other bastards are also responsible for this incident. They're probably trying to push the blame onto another unlucky bastard who's the perfect scapegoat. Solo, the god of music and dance, was quite open-minded about this matter. He chatted with me through the bard that he was talking to. Ever since that incident, Solo had kept in contact with me. Of course, I didn't want to have anything to do with a gay god, but it was indeed necessary for me to obtain information from the higher realms. Not only that, I couldn't directly contact Ale for everything. The other god candidates were even more unreliable. I didn't know many gods at the moment. Mary was a dwarf goddess, after all, and she spent most of her time in a drunken state. As for Baena, I wasn't so foolish as to send myself to her doorstep. It seemed that she would automatically enter a berserk state whenever she heard my name. Ale killed him. He directly broke into Tiamat's divine kingdom and seriously injured him. He killed off 2 of the follower gods who tried to stop him, and even stole his divine soul and divine concept. The other main gods didn't react? The source of order didn't react either? The holy war has just begun, and they're already having a civil war? Ale must have crossed the line this time. Not at all. The Holy Light faction crossed the line first. The other main gods were quite displeased with Ale's actions. But since Ale lost a god and Tiamat was seriously injured, this matter will end here. Neither side will continue spreading the news. From a certain standpoint, this was a type of compromise. It was a compromise made with the attention of the other main gods and the source of order. On the surface, it would seem that the Ale faction was at a disadvantage. After all, the Ale faction had lost a rare opportunity and reputation. Although the Holy Light faction had lost 2 gods, they were 2 follower gods who were so weak that not many people knew about them. They were completely negligible in the eyes of the main gods. But only I knew that we had actually made a huge profit this time. Punishment and discipline, huh? Ale really went all out this time. These 2 divine concepts weren't much at all. In the current world, discipline was something that only a few ascetics and devout believers pursued. Punishment was a low-level concept that couldn't even be mentioned. These 2 divine concepts didn't seem to have much potential. While these 2 divine concepts weren't valued, the divine concept of using ascetic practices to atone for one's sins so that a pure soul could be brought into the divine kingdom was recognized by all the gods' churches. The divine concept of ascetic practices was quite impressive in this world where divine authority was so powerful. In fact, the god of ascetic practices was even more powerful than the goddess of wealth. Since ascetics and warrior monks were able to obtain powerful combat strength through ascetic practices, the Church of Ascetic Practices was formed by powerful elites who were skilled in combat. This made the god of masochism the incarnation of a powerful god. The end result was that the divine concepts of punishment and discipline became extensions of the concept of ascetic practices, which made them even less popular. It was precisely because Traymat felt that there was no more potential to be discovered that he gave these 2 divine concepts to his own follower god. Did Ale directly steal their divine concepts? However, only I, Ale, and a few others knew that punishment and discipline were divine concepts that couldn't be obtained in our Remaking the Hades plan. In that thick document there was a list of gods that needed to be killed as soon as possible, and these 2 follower gods were among them. If punishment and discipline were concepts derived from religious practices, they would only be second-rate concepts among second-rate concepts. However, if they were concepts derived from law, for example, punishment would be the punishment for breaking the law, while discipline would be a lower-level concept than law itself, and discipline could even be derived from the concepts of judicial discipline and moral discipline. These 2 follower gods were necessary nourishment for the throne of law, as well as the necessary follower gods to create the Hell of Hades. Of course, the after-effects of this incident hadn't ended yet, or perhaps the higher-level gods had already come to an agreement. However, as mortals we would still need to take revenge on the Holy Church, which was also a mortal. As for those 2 divine concepts that were destined to suddenly disappear, even though there were likely many who knew about them, I merely nodded and didn't say anything in response to Solo's doubts. Some things were far too important. Even though Solo was a god on our side, I didn't want another person to know about them. It would seem that I'll need to hurry up as well. Of course, let's first deal with the important matter at hand. Great stone sculptor Ainslow, what else do you have to say? Wasn't the incredibly ugly mother of 10,000 stones who was currently feeling rather uneasy? When the battle reached a stalemate, I unhesitatingly summoned an ambush. Since great stone sculptor Ainslow had already entered the Forest of Dreams, in a way, she had also joined my side. Of course, I wouldn't forget to bring her, a top-level combat strength, onto the battlefield. However, the result was that out of the 7 Earth Elemental Planes, 7 Saints, which were all Saint-ranked and above in combat strength, only the youngest, Beifong Heralt, came. However, the result was miraculous. Could it be that the youngest of the 7 Saints was also the most difficult to deal with? Getting back to the main topic, if we had lost, there would naturally be nothing to say. But now that we had won, we naturally had to take revenge for not listening to orders and running away. Otherwise, if everyone was like this, the morale of the Earth Elemental Planes would collapse, and it would be difficult to lead our troops. My lord, I'm truly innocent. You know that we're all Earth Elemental Lords, but the Titan Giants are the children of the Earth. were completely unable to move in front of them. 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks and transformed into diamonds. It would seem that she had quite a bit of carbon in her body. I suddenly recalled the fairy tale about how mermaids' tears turned into pearls. Pearls were mainly composed of calcium carbonate. Mermaids were able to turn their tears into pearls because they had too much gypsum in their tear ducts, or were they mystical creatures that ate rocks as food? It seemed that only crocodiles ate rocks in the natural world. Although they ate rocks to help with digestion, crocodiles were also amphibious. Could it be that mermaid's true identity was actually a crocodile that had become sentient? Cough, cough, it seemed that I had accidentally ruined my childhood again. Getting back to the main topic, about the old fossil mermaid. The stone mother, I'll talk about it some other time. I've accepted all the diamonds that she dripped. I'll see if I can sell them for some money later. It's not that I'm being stingy, it's that I've been robbed far too cleanly recently. When I find the bastard that stole my money, I'll definitely… What? I've gone off topic again? Alright then, I'll talk about how to make a living next time. Let's get back to the main topic. Ainslow's tears kept flowing, but I directly treated them as crocodile tears. I wasn't an idiot. Although the Titan giants were known as the children of the earth, the winged tribe was also known as the children of the sky, and the elves were known as the children of nature and the children of the forest. Actually, they were all just trying to make themselves look good. What did it matter? The Titan giants weren't elemental creatures. They only acknowledged that the earth gave birth to them and that they were natural creations, not that some god had created them. If the Titan giants really had anything to do with the earth element, Omdoroken wouldn't have been the earth elemental god to begin with. Unable to move in front of the Titan giants? I think that you all know that the Titan giants are your opponents, so you don't dare to fight at all. Ainslow didn't reply. She also stopped crying. It would seem that even she felt that this act was rather boring. This ugly earth elemental lord that seemed short and short was actually a peer of Omdoroken's generation. She was much older than most true gods. Perhaps she had even seen the complete form of the Titan giants before. In that case, it was completely understandable that she was so scared of fighting. Even if she was capable of fighting against the Titan giants' incarnations, she would still be worried that the complete form of the Titan giants would come looking for her. And with her blocking the Titan giants, how could the other great saints possibly dare to fight? Thinking up to this point, I playfully sized up this short and fat ancient stone mother. Perhaps her power level wasn't much compared to the top-level combat strength, but her information about the immemorial era and the immemorial era was perhaps even more important than herself. Of course, it would be quite difficult to directly ask her about these things. But from a certain standpoint, the stone mother that had lost my trust was also losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Before I figure out certain things, I still can't talk to her about that matter. Originally, I had intended to talk to her about repairing the Earth Elemental Throne and making a new Earth Elemental Lord the Earth Elemental God. However, such a sly and self-centered Earth Elemental Lord becoming the Earth Elemental God wouldn't be a good thing for us. As long as a new Earth Elemental God was created, it would naturally greatly slow down the Titan Giants' revival. The Earth Elemental God's creation required 2 conditions: a sufficiently powerful Earth Elemental Lord and the Earth Elemental Throne. According to what I knew, the great stone sculptor Ainslow before me was the Earth Elemental Lord closest to becoming the Earth Elemental God. However, the Earth Elemental Throne's shard had been stolen by 2 people. One was me, and the other was, Beifong. What do you say? Your brothers and sisters are all so unkind. I didn't mistreat them at all. Don't you think it's a bit too much for them to run away when they're needed? Back then, the Sandworm King that Beifong had tamed had destroyed the Earth Elemental Throne. A portion of the Earth Elemental Throne's shard had definitely fallen into Beifong's hands. Those shards were supposed to be his spoils of war, but it was likely that Beifong would need to exchange them with Beifong in the future. This question wouldn't be easy to answer. It was quite obvious that the Forest of Dreams was beneficial to the Earth Elemental Lord. I wasn't making things up. While I was asking Beifong, I was staring at Ainslow, forcing her to give me an answer. Beifong also knew what was going on. He simply continued to tease the White Lion and didn't reply. Meanwhile, Ainslow herself remained silent. However, she also knew that she wouldn't be able to fool Beifong like this. In the end, she would have to make a decision. Chapter 358. I can serve you, but you must pay me a price equal to my loyalty. If you can agree to one of my requests, perhaps it'll be easier for us to reach an agreement. Mother Stone's ambiguous words didn't give me an answer. However, judging from her expression as she secretly glanced at Beifong, she actually had the shy expression of a young girl in love on her face, which was covered in lumps of stone. Everything was said without words. From a certain standpoint, Beifong's abilities had indeed surpassed the legend of turning stone into gold. He was truly capable of moving a stone statue's heart. When I returned from the battlefield and learned of Beifong's battle accomplishments, even I was confused. Impossible. Just by talking, he managed to tame a gigantic war beast that received the Titan Giant's divine power? Are you kidding me? That thing has at least semi-god combat strength, and it's also being restricted by the Titan Giant. How could it possibly betray me just like that? But sometimes, certain people and certain things were just that unreasonable. Facts spoke louder than words, and reality spoke louder than theory. If you felt that something was inconceivable, it could only mean that you didn't understand the situation. Fine then, to be more direct, nobody knew what Beifong had done, nor did they want to know. But when I saw this miraculous man, who was able to move even the earth elemental stone goddess, having fun with that beautiful divine beast lion, even I felt that something was off. If you look at it from a different perspective, isn't he taming some ancient princess in another dimension, obtaining her dowry and a large number of subordinates? Not only that, his personal power level has increased exponentially through battle. Not only that, on the battlefield, he managed to use his mouth to tame a beautiful individual who could easily crush him. Everything has been so smooth. Yet, he's such a playboy all the way, and there won't be any bloodshed in his harem. Isn't this just like a YY novel's main character? Beifong, if you changed your style, you could totally become a night novel's main character. In fact, his novels about his own love history and biography are selling like hotcake. The descriptions of the details are complete. The main buyers are not only men, but even many married women love it. I've read it before. It's truly amazing. Harlois's words made me feel uncomfortable. How could this be possible? How could anyone buy such a thing that offended public morals? Not only that, Beifong actually knew how to read. He even knew how to write. Drakons are intelligent creatures as well. Be careful not to get sued for racial discrimination. That's impossible. Just Beifong's existence is enough to make it impossible for the book to pass the censorship. It's impossible for such a thing to be printed and published. No chamber of commerce would dare to accept such an order. To be honest, his writing is not bad, and his writing is also good. After reading it and comparing it, I realized that there was such a story in the world of beasts. Heloise, don't go the wrong way. Being interested and curious about certain forbidden areas was usually the beginning of walking down the wrong path. If changing a normal person's sexual orientation was called turning gay, then what exactly should it be called turning a normal person into a beast? Could it be that a new term was about to be born because of Beifong? Beifong, could you please stop? What are you thinking? Don't worry, I'm normal. Weren't the recent night novels popular to add some animal characteristics to the female characters? Since humans could imitate beasts, naturally beasts could also imitate humans. The relationships between men and women in Beifong's Chronicles of the Hunter were basically normal. If we were to compare it to real life, it would probably be beasts transforming into humans, males transforming into females, males transforming into females, and so on. The seventh female lead, little Mia, is so cute, but I can't take it anymore when I think about how her original form was a big yellow dog, and a male one at that. As expected, it's enough to just look at the novel itself. Knowing about the author will only ruin your worldview. Alright then, I felt slightly more at ease after hearing this explanation, but it seemed that there were still many flaws in Heloise's words. Forget about the explanation of male transforming into female, we all know what kind of person this guy is. The seventh female lead? With such a mess, how can the plot still be read? I asked that as well. I remember that Beifong said this. Every single one of my relationships is serious, super serious, and I'm in love with my life on the line. I'm willing to give up everything, including my life, for my lover. This is the reason why I was able to obtain the heart of protection of universal love. I'm a playboy, but I'm even more single-minded. Every time I fall in love, I'm completely devoted. I enjoy the joy of being in love, and I long for the next relationship that comes along with fate. If you think that I'm only pursuing carnal desires, then you're underestimating me and my lovers. Although this reason was quite ridiculous, since he was able to form a soul imprint with such a concept, it could only mean that he truly believed in love, and even treated it as his life goal. Personally, I would probably be unable to accept such a chaotic concept of love, but since it was someone else's personal hobby, it wouldn't be convenient for me to comment on it. How could it be possible? Was I such a good person? I was going to write up a proposal and apply for legislation to prevent books with such a different sexual orientation from entering the market. One Beifong was enough. If books became a tidal wave of Beifong, would this world still be saved? Although I don't want to admit it, it's most likely the truth. Did he convince you? No, when he said this, he was being fought over by a male water buffalo and a female lizard. There was also a female gorilla crying on the side while tugging on a handkerchief. Since it was so disgusting, he actually dared to act out an 8 o'clock scene in front of me, and he was even a beast. I sent him flying with a wave of arcane missiles. Well done. I gave her a thumbs up, but Heloise was still quite depressed. He also gave me a thumbs up while he was in midair. He was intentionally angering me so that I would send him flying in order to save myself from this situation. Forget it, let's change the topic. I don't want to know anything about him at all. From a certain standpoint, if it was possible, I really didn't want to know what Beifong was like at all. But now, even this ancient elemental lord was willing to offer this as a condition. I couldn't help but be impressed by Beifong's abilities in this area. Right now, the most important thing was to obtain the information I wanted from the great stone sculptor. Since she wanted this draken, I would simply give it to her. After all, this draken's tastes were unparalleled in the world, so it didn't matter. Just as I was planning on having an arranged marriage, Beifong jumped out on his own. Sister Stone and I are purely brother and sister. Please don't misunderstand. I was astonished to hear this. Beifong was actually rejecting someone else's proposal? Weren't you supposed to love all non-humans? Unfortunately, no matter how I winked at him, he wouldn't budge at all. He was just like an upright gentleman who argued for what was right, making me sound like an old fuddy-duddy who was trying to force me into a marriage. Heloise? Don't ask me. I don't know anything. Then you know two things. Tell me. How about I transform into a cat and send Beifong to you? Did you see that lion? He's a distant relative of yours, and he's even male. Although this was the same old trick, it was fine as long as it worked. After all, Beifong had no interest in Heloise, who was originally an elf. However, it was enough to scare her. As far as I knew, Beifong was already capable of using his gaze to awaken Heloise's mental trauma. Pure love? Tui. It's strange that Beifong has such a thing. She has a physical body of stone and can't do anything, but he said something about spiritual love. And when the great stone sculptor transforms into his human form, he's no longer interested in her. Although Heloise's anger was definitely mixed with her personal grudges, I instantly understood, even though I would have preferred not to understand at all. It was quite normal for high-level elemental creatures and dragons to have humanoid forms. However, most powerful individuals would have humanoid forms that weren't too ugly. Once the humanoid form was determined, it would be impossible to change it. The ancient monsters of the world were especially fond of the beautiful high elves. The Stone Mother's humanoid form would most likely be a beauty as well. A normal person's sense of beauty would likely accept Ainslow's elven form, but Ainslow just so happened to be a freak. Even an honest official would find it difficult to resolve family dispute. Even a corrupt official wouldn't be able to interfere with these freaks' family dispute. If it were possible, I would really like to leave. However, it just so happened that I had many things I needed to discuss with Ainslow, and I needed her full cooperation. Was there something else apart from the Earth Elemental God? Of course there was. My frigid winter Earth required other high-quality divine elemental items in order to achieve balance and further perfect it. I had researched this topic in the Mage Country, but I hadn't found anything. Are you an idiot? If those mages knew about top-quality elemental items, they'd be fighting over them like crazy. Even embedding such items into staffs to buff magic would be a priceless treasure. Would they even leave one for you? Even if their elemental elements aren't compatible, it'd be great to leave one for their disciples and descendants as a family heirloom. At the time, Harlois's words had shattered my hopes of being lucky. However, when I asked the gods, I didn't get an answer. Or, perhaps I should say that the answer was the same. Are you an idiot? If I was here, I would have stolen one long ago. Why would I leave one for you? As expected, considering that Baana was the goddess of wealth, it was possible that she knew something. However, the result was the same. It was fortunate that I had given her some small gifts in order to ease the tension between us. However, when I thought about it, I discovered that when it came to elemental divine items, it was likely that nobody would know more than the ancient elemental lords. Elemental creatures had their own circles and world. The elemental wars between them had never ceased. And, due to the fact that the elements were mutually exclusive, the elemental creatures were unable to use or control other divine items with elemental seeds. Since they were on guard against their enemies, it was only natural that the elemental creatures would have a deep understanding of their enemies' divine items. Meanwhile, one of my subordinates was an elemental lord who was in the same generation as Omdorokan and the other elemental gods. Of course I wanted to ask her about this. However, this type of information would definitely be of a high level, so it would be normal for me to try and get on her good side first. But now, Ainslow had obviously fallen in love with Ainslow, and she had even dragged me into this matter since I had a request for her into it. I really didn't want to care about the love affairs of such abnormal creatures, but I just couldn't. In the end, I used the excuse of, I'm about to introduce animal protection laws across the entire Northlands. Yep, I made a deal with you in the past, but it won't be implemented in Sulphur Mountain City. Touching someone else's pet without their owner's permission will be considered trespassing. If you don't want to be hunted down by the Justice Knight, you understand. As an excuse, I made Beifong promise to give this plump stone princess more chances and at least go on a few dates with her. That was all I could do? Indeed, that was all I could do. After all, I couldn't possibly force this Draken to marry me. If I really forced this Draken to marry me, I felt that it would become a lifelong shame and black history for me. But even at this, Ainslow couldn't help but nod in satisfaction and thank me. It would seem that she was incredibly infatuated with him. Then, when I asked her about it, she hesitated for a moment before telling me, but that only made my head hurt. A true Titan giant's heart? It's a combination of wind and earth elements. Of course I know that it's a top-quality god item, But isn't this a little too difficult? The stone of gravity, that's the core of the pillar of wrath in the Swallow region? What do you think you'll do if I take away the foundation of your home? That's right, hunt it down to the very end. There's a mega empire in the Swallow region. Do you think it'll be fun to be hunted down by tens of millions of people? The Devourer ranked 5th on the Calamity rankings? Alright, I heard that it's a type of mutated sandworm, but it's a monster that can easily swallow an entire volcano. What do you want me to do with it? Isn't this a scam? Why is it getting more and more difficult? Although it was slightly better than the previous ones, it was obvious that anything that could survive in the world would be difficult to obtain. And I wouldn't even consider obtaining these Earth Elemental God items. That's strange. Why are they all Earth Elemental God items? Aren't there any other Earth Elemental God items? I asked in astonishment. However, Ainslow, who was just as astonished, didn't seem to be faking it. I thought that you were intending to repair the Earth Elemental throne. Actually, these are the materials that we're currently searching for as well. Do you want information on other Earth Elemental God items? Although there aren't many, I have some as well. Alright then, judging from her disappointed expression that she couldn't hide, she had her own selfish motives. As long as the Earth Elemental throne could be repaired, she would naturally be the most likely to become the next Earth Elemental God. However, now obviously wasn't the time for a showdown. I pretended to be a fool and asked for more information. This time, Mother Stone didn't feel any pressure at all. After all, these Earth Elemental God items had nothing to do with them. From a certain standpoint, any Earth Elemental God item that the Earth Elemental Lords had information on would either be impossible to obtain, or they weren't ready to be born yet. Naturally, it would be incredibly difficult to obtain. However, if the Earth Elemental Lords encountered any Wind Elemental or other God items that were hostile to them, wearing them would weaken them. Since these Earth Elemental Gods were destined to be treasures to their enemies, the Earth Elemental Gods would naturally think of ways to destroy these Earth Elemental Gods. And if it was truly impossible to destroy these Earth Elemental Gods, they would seal or prevent information about these Earth Elemental Gods from obtaining these Earth Elemental Gods. In this way, information would be valuable. More than 10,000 years ago, the Holai volcano had, as expected, this information was quite reliable. In fact, Ainslow had personally sealed the Earth Elemental God item. But now, it was my turn to be troublesome. Ding! Congratulations for triggering an epic level quest. Go to the Holai volcano to find. Ding! Congratulations for triggering an epic level quest. Go to the Wing Tribe's former capital, Lays. Such quests began flooding my screen, ranging from the lowest to the highest semi-god rank. However, it would take quite a while to complete all of them. And considering that I needed materials on the same level as the Earth Elemental Throne, it was likely that I wouldn't even need to consider any epic level quests. System notification. This quest's difficulty is only based on Ainslow's description. The actual difficulty will be updated based on the quest's progress. Alright then, I knew that there would be more trouble to come. The difficulty was one thing, but the information I obtained was far too outdated. I would still have to investigate whether or not it was real. The Stone Mother's first words were from tens of thousands of years ago. Just comparing the names of the ancient and modern places that Ainslow described would require several historians to do the same. Just organizing the information would require a great deal of effort. Every dog has its day. Just a moment ago, I was still complaining about not having enough information. Now I had too much information, and I needed to go through them one by one. Moreover, the information I had was extremely outdated, which would make the quest's results even more of a gamble. A quest that I had worked so hard to complete might end up with nothing at all. It was possible that a small excellent quest would give me an excellent item. That's true. System, can't you just let me go? If I keep doing these lottery quests, even 3 years won't be enough. You know how I hated lottery quests when I was adventuring back in the day. My luck was terrible. I bought a treasure map with a lot of money, but I ended up getting nothing a few hundred years later. That wasn't even the worst part. One time, I actually chased after a phantom cat that was guarding the treasure for half a month before I realized that the treasure was actually a fish head and a fish bone, which were rarely seen in the mountains. And they were rotten. Back then, I was so disgusted. System notification: you're such an idiot. If you can't do the quest yourself, why don't you find someone to do it for you? You've won 3 consecutive championships in the arena, you've got a professional quest master to do the epic quest for you, and Bear Grylls has taught you how to survive in the wilderness. You only need 998. How come you're already a boss? Why do you always want to do everything yourself? Someone to do it for me? Someone to do it for me? I paused in surprise for a moment, but then came to a realization. You're saying that I can give out quests for those contract heroes to do for me? Yep, as long as I specify the difficulty of the quests and give out rewards, I'll have endless helpers. I'll just need to think of a way to get the reward money. Doesn't that mean I'll have to think of a way to scam money again? Right, it's about time I go to the Bardi capital. It's not good to keep the Dragon Knight Archduke waiting. Chapter 359. Quests for contract heroes weren't limited to just one faction. In fact, since there weren't many participants in the early stages of the game, there weren't many bottlenecks in giving out quests. Basically, any faction on ALS side or any government country could give out quests. However, whether or not the quests would reach the contract heroes would depend on whether or not the system approved them. Since the contract heroes was a platform that provided quests, it was just like how a certain treasure would have both buyer and seller ratings. In order to prevent malicious quest publishers from appearing, the system also had a rating system for quest publishers. But what was slightly different here was that the rating system didn't depend on how many quests had been given out. Instead, it was based on the publisher's identity, past achievements, standpoint, and so on. The main thing was how trustworthy they were. To put it simply, if the Holy Church or any other faction wanted to give out a quest, it would be one thing if they didn't pass the review. Even if they did, the publisher's information would be marked with a black symbol of calamity. From another angle, this meant that the publisher was completely unreliable. If the publisher was still tempted by the promise of benefits, then they deserved their misfortune. Although many of the quests were written by me, they were still completely different in the process. After all, not only would every publisher have their own thoughts, there would always be a difference between planning and execution. However, I never expected that I would still end up causing some trouble. Due to my special identity, I received the highest rating from the Contract Heroes system, which was almost equal to other true gods. This basically meant that the official system would give me priority in completing my quests, and the official system would guarantee that I was a trustworthy employer. This wasn't any special privilege. It was due to my status as a semi-official. From my standpoint, I would definitely do my best to help the Contract Heroes system develop in a positive way. That was why the system gave me the highest rating of trustworthiness. Even though I wasn't a high and mighty god, I still had to worry about the overall situation while working together with everyone else. If there was a problem, the front line would be the first to suffer. Simply put, it was like eating rotten cabbage while worrying about the old emperor's heart. For some reason, I couldn't help but think of the temporary workers who were known as scapegoat. I hoped that I wouldn't end up like them. Cough, cough. Getting back to the main topic, it was quite easy for me to give out my quests. I even mentioned that the information might be outdated and needed to be verified. But on the other hand, the Contract Heroes system wasn't able to help me. Instead, they came to make trouble for me. I needed to pay them. However, this wasn't a problem for me. Although my pouch was completely empty, and my justice points had all been taken, it wasn't as if I didn't have any attractive rewards. My reward is an IOU. All right then, I knew that it would be quite shameless of me to refuse to pay the farmers their wages, and that I might even get beaten up by them. However, my promissory note was the equivalent of something, a product of magical engineering. From the very start, those engineers had been my subordinate. The manpower and technology were all mine, and the finished products were all mine as well. And now, Amelia had fallen into an eternal slumber, and her thorn garden was now under my control. She had lost all of her wealth from back in the day. As I was a villain who was always being hunted down and killed, I had dug quite a few holes to prepare for my return. I could easily draw a dozen treasure maps. Maybe I don't have a single cent in my wallet, but I do have some asset. As long as I write out an IOU, I can definitely cash it. Thinking about it this way, I seem to have accidentally become tall, handsome, and rich. Who said that one? 2 meters doesn't meet the requirements? Come out, I swear I won't kill him. I think he'll accept it. Even if he doesn't use those things, he can sell them for money. However, I had still underestimated the power of my promissory note. These new products of magical engineering were completely exclusive products in this world. Perhaps I had only been testing them slightly on the battlefield here, but they had already achieved astonishing results on the battlefield over there. And it was precisely these results that caused the products of magical engineering and the Night Squadron from the Northlands to become famous in the world. What about the battlefield over there? The Ottoman Empire's battle to defend a water city. While I was busy here, the battle between the former Ottoman Empire's capital, Kajisi, and the current Sea Tribe's capital, the Rain City, Falohi, had reached a stalemate. This city that had been completely submerged by seawater was obviously the home ground of the Sea Tribe and the aquatic species. In this region, the Sea Tribe could easily challenge those of a higher power level. Even a top-level individual might die if they were careless and got surrounded. In such a battlefield, humanity's most proficient human wave tactics were rendered useless. Even the strongest knight would be unable to charge in the water. The heavy armor that the Sea Tribe was so proud of had now become a burden. Even in areas where infantry could barely fight, there was water that was half a person tall. If a heavily armored warrior accidentally slipped and fell, they would never be able to get up again. And for the Sea Tribe, no matter how strong the attacking army was, all they needed to do was keep stirring up trouble, and these unyielding warriors would become food for the fish in the sea. Using ships? Traditional wooden ships could be pierced through at any moment. Small ships would be unable to withstand the winds and waves that the Sea Tribe intentionally summoned. Not to mention, gigantic ships wouldn't even be able to be used on such a battlefield. According to the usual battlefield rules, there was no balance to speak of on such a battlefield. No military commander would choose to attack such a dangerous location. But ever since the Ottoman Empire lost its capital, the flames of war here had never stopped. After all, this place was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. This was the military, political, and economic core of a mega-empire. It was the face of all the Ottoman people. When a country's capital was besieged, or even captured, or even massacred, the invaders would often believe that this would destroy the will of the defending country. But in reality, this was the lifelong shame of the country's citizens. They would do everything in their power to wash away this shame. There were far too many such examples in history. However, there would always be people who proudly came up with a so-called surprise attack plan on the enemy's capital. They didn't think about what would happen if the battle turned into a full-scale war right from the start. The King of Winter Wolves, Dasos, had left immortal achievements in the game's history. Such a person wouldn't be simple. Not only that, as his experience and power level increased, he would become more and more experienced and difficult to deal with. The difference between ordinary people and ambitious people was that when faced with a seemingly hopeless situation, ordinary people would feel despair or even anger. They would be surrounded by negative emotions and be forced to solve the problem. However, for ambitious people, a predicament was also a type of opportunity. They would face danger head-on and laugh as they turned the danger into their own opportunity. Indeed, Roland had lost his capital city. However, he directly built a new warring capital less than 30 kilometers away from Rain City. That city was still called Kagursi, and the architectural style of the capital city was intentionally imitating the capital city, as if it was only a secondary city of the capital city. Roland also led a team of soldiers to patrol his capital city every day, regardless of rain or shine. Every day, countless people and resources would pass by the Ottoman city walls. Every morning and every evening, the emperor and empress could be seen waving at the citizens who came to reinforce them. Every time they counterattacked, he would stand at the very front. Even if the sea giant's angry roars were right beside his ears, he would never waver. Our Emperor. 2 years ago, this title would only refer to him because of his status. But now, it was a title of respect from the bottom of the heart. It should be known that the forbidden spell that created the Rain City was still in effect. The Rain City was expanding its territory every day. Sooner or later, this city would be submerged. Since the new capital wasn't too far away from the Rain City, the powerful sea monsters that were able to leave the water for a short period of time would often launch surprise attacks. Even so, he still persisted in the new Kagursi city, repelling the sea monsters' surprise attacks time and time again. The battle was indeed unfavorable for the Ottoman Empire. Even if they occasionally regained lost territory, they would soon lose it again. Their counterattack had already reached the 67th wave, but they still hadn't gained anything substantial. But looking at it from a different angle, the Ottoman people had already gotten used to the sea tribes' fighting style in the endless tug-of-war. The younger generation had also grown up in battle. The entire country had been mobilized, and the entire country's national power and industry had been converted from a peaceful era to a war-torn era. Although they didn't win every time, they didn't lose. That's right, they didn't lose. Every time they counterattacked, they would always do so with the premise that they wouldn't lose. They would ambush a certain area, kill the sea tribe there, and then swiftly retreat. In actual combat, they actually used 30% of the sea tribe's forces as the vanguard and 70% of the sea tribe's forces as reinforcements. Although this was quite passive and wouldn't be able to obtain decisive results, judging from how there were fewer and fewer sea tribe members in the surrounding areas, the sea tribes seemed to have lost their confidence in conquering everything. Even though the expanded Rain City was now less than 10 kilometers away from the new Kagursi, the ambitious Dasos still patiently gathered his troops. He even turned the new Rain City into a training ground for hunting and training. As the ruler of a quasi-mega empire, Dasos had the confidence to be willful. If he considered things from a purely rational point of view, he could even ignore the fall of the capital. After the past 2 years of war, his father and brothers remaining officials died in battle. Originally, a powerful emperor's authority would grow endlessly during war. The current Dasos had completely taken control of the entire country. Alright then, of course, there was also his wisest and most trusted good friend and his most beautiful and gentle empress. The former had become the #1 prime minister of the Ottoman Empire, while the latter was viewed by more and more Ottoman citizens as the perfect woman in their hearts. However, among the closest officials, all of them knew that the empress was only second to Dasos. From various points of view, the Ottoman Empire had already surpassed the powerful country in the game's history. As for their opponents, the Seafolk's country, even though they still occupied Rain City, wasn't doing too well in all aspects. More and more Seafolk tribes were entering Rain City. The warm sunlight, free beaches, and warm meat made the Seafolk's leaders wild with joy. However, at the same time, the Seafolk's fighting spirit was also worn down. The Seafolk only looked forward to occupying more half of the continent and the entertainment venues in the capital. Instead, they focused all of their energy on internal strife. Those who ate cooked meat wanted to eat more, and those who enjoyed the warm sunlight even learned to wear noble clothing that wouldn't allow them to enter the water. The blacksmiths that forged weapons no longer had any customers. Instead, all sorts of restaurants and bars began opening for business again. Even the underwater concert halls started playing strange music again. Since resources were still limited, even with the sea tribe's new royalty restraining them, internal strife continued to occur. After all, the sea tribe were all tribes, and they were already used to fighting amongst themselves. The so-called new royalty was only one of them in the past, and their reputation wasn't enough to suppress the sea tribe's internal strife. The sea tribe didn't care at all about the humans' counterattacks that were becoming more and more powerful. They only passively waited for the Rain City to expand, believing that this would be enough. In their minds, the humans wouldn't dare to enter the deep waters to start a full-scale war, and their enemies were the other sea tribe members who wanted to fight for power. Perhaps it would be a good thing for a few more sea tribe members to die. While the sea tribe was busy fighting for power, the sea tribe also united against the sea tribe members. This situation actually allowed the weaker humans to regain the initiative in the war. And it just so happened that the sea tribe's guardian goddess Lady Storm, who had absolute authority over the sea tribe, had sunk into a strange silence. All right, after she was injured by Ale, due to certain reasons, her former ally, the water elemental goddess, also withdrew all of her direct subordinates, leaving only a few low-level water elemental creatures behind. The absolute authority of the sea tribe didn't care about the sea tribe at all, which further intensified the chaos and internal strife. Under such circumstances, Dasos organized the 68th Crusade against the sea tribe. But this time, the goal wasn't just to kill off a few sea tribe members. It was also at this time that Renée and her Northlands Legion arrived. Together with them was the Envy Marcelet, who had sworn to take revenge. Chapter 360. If I had any other choice, I really wouldn't want to come here. This place doesn't give me any good memories. At the welcoming banquet that Dasos organized, René's blunt words as the representative of the reinforcements instantly caused the atmosphere to quiet down. Your Highness Renée is truly a straightforward person. The past always makes people sigh, but today is a happy day, so let's not talk about it for now. Your Highness, you're truly the pride of the Northlands, the Night Princess, to be able to cast aside your personal grudges and make the correct choice. However, Dasos maintained his gentlemanly smile and led the applause. Everyone around him hurriedly followed suit and applauded. Only then did the situation not become awkward for too long. Indeed, how could Renée possibly have a good impression of Kajisi? First, she was forced to sign a subservient alliance that took advantage of Kajisi's precarious position. Then, she was forced to marry Kajisi. If this was a female-oriented romance novel, it would probably be considered a national grudge or a family grudge. What followed would probably be a love-hate relationship that would entangle her for the rest of her life. Alright, since this wasn't the style, there was no need to think too much about it. At the very least, it seemed that René's grudges weren't small at all. However, her arrival here was indeed justifiable. After all, during the war against the Beastmen in the Northlands, the Ottoman Empire sent out night squadrons and diplomatic squadrons to aid the humans. No matter whether or not they were effective in the end, the Ottoman Empire's White Wolf Knight didn't retreat even when facing the Poison God. They still fought for the humans in desperate times, so Roland and Hermit were still grateful. Plus, the Ottoman Empire was currently the Northland's largest trading partner and aid provider. Roland and Hermit had signed a bunch of agreements in Definder. At the very least, they were still allies, and they seemed to have a very good relationship with each other. There were only a few main battlefields in the Pan-continent. If Renée wanted to train her troops and earn justice points, she only had a few choices: the battlefield against the undead or the battlefield against the aquatic species. As for the Northlands Knight, No matter if it was the Aurora Knight that controlled ice or the 4 elemental swordcasters that controlled magic swords, they didn't have an obvious advantage against the undead. However, with the help of the Aurora Knight and the battleships, they weren't afraid to fight in the water. So, she unhesitatingly chose this backup option. Not only would this be an advantage for training her troops, it would also be a political consideration. The Northlands countries were trying to re-establish their own prestige. It would be far too passive for them to stay in a corner of the continent. From a certain standpoint, Renée was taught by many excellent teachers and wasn't stupid to begin with. After she regained her self-confidence, she was far more mature than Roland had expected. Just her arrival and the arrival of the Ottoman Empire's fleet greatly increased the morale of the Ottomans. That was because the Borealis was currently the only airship in the entire continent that possessed such a rare aerial battleship. At the time, some people felt embarrassed when they saw the cheering crowd below them. That was because the Borealis had actually been stolen from the Ottoman Empire. But since the owner didn't even know about it, there was nothing they could do about it. The Borealis's 7-star Guardian Squadron was still under construction. Only the Mizar had come. The entire airship fleet consisted of 1 super battleship, 1 heavy battleship, and more than 20 small speedboats. However, there were also nearly 100 Aurora Knight and more than 204 elemental swordcasters accompanying the Borealis. It could be said that Renée had brought along her main force and intended to go all out. Of course, Olivia's alchemists and engineers were also with her. It would be far too much of a waste for such a large airship to only carry her own people. Along the way, she brought along more than 1,200 adventurers at 4 previously agreed upon gathering points. However, due to the limited number of seats available, anyone who wanted to board the airship would have to go through a selection process. Most of them were contract heroes and the strong. Approximately 700 of them were contract heroes. Most of the remaining adventurers were still observing or hadn't managed to become the first batch of contract heroes. Of course, there was no need to mention whether or not a certain princess was trying to recruit new warriors along the way. As for Dasos, he didn't feel good facing the Northlands princess, who didn't hide her resentment at all. Renée was polite and considerate to everyone else, but she was incredibly cold towards him. Although Roland was smiling as if he didn't care, he was actually feeling more and more annoyed inside. The reason? It was actually quite bearable for him to be treated coldly. After all, she was his reinforcements. The only reason Dasos couldn't sleep at night was because of her familiar face. As he looked at this face that was exactly the same as Roland's face, he couldn't help but recall his dark history that had been buried in the darkness. He fell in love with a man and even proposed to her multiple times in public. Just thinking about this made him want to hug his head and cry. The worst part was that when he saw this face, he discovered that he mysteriously missed that person. This made him want to cry, but no tears came out. That was why every time he saw Renée, he would mysteriously feel his heart move. Their identical faces would always remind him of that person's every frown or smile, which would make him feel even more pained. It was as if a wound that had already healed was torn open again, and salt was viciously poured on it. Am I really a gay? The pitiful emperor had never doubted himself so much. Feeling helpless, he could only go to his beloved empress for comfort. However, facing the emperor who was wavering, the Empress Rosemary seemed indifferent, but when she thought of her true identity, she felt that it was a little funny. Still, she used her own way to comfort the emperor. In the end, she even said, "Don't think so much. No matter what, Her Highness Renée is a woman. If you fall in love with her, it proves that you're normal." Alright, this comfort seemed to be of some use. At the very least, Dasos felt much better at that time. She's still unmarried, right? For an emperor who had strong desires, it was only natural for him to get what he wanted. After discovering that it was only natural for him to fall in love with her, he even had evil intentions towards Renée. However, that very night, his extravagant hopes were extinguished. When a spy from the palace came to tell him that Renée had actually brought 2 beautiful adventurers into her room, and that those delightful things had happened in her room, he was once again stunned. So, she also likes women. Then, am I really not normal? Or, she's Roland herself, and she's just hiding it from me. However, through the secret investigation of the maid, that Renée was actually a woman. This time, the Emperor suffered a heavy psychological blow again. Does the person I love like women? From a certain standpoint, the result of Darso's, who was becoming more and more famous as a ruler, suffering yet another blow to his personal feelings, was that his own sexual orientation was even more shaken. He could only seek comfort from his female confidante, once again. Speaking of which, if he knew the truth about his empress, would he directly jump off a building and commit suicide? Or perhaps he would simply take a 180-degree turn and write a poem that transcended history. You hate that I was born late, and I hate that you were born early. In my entire life, what I hate the most is that I still can't forget you even before I die. Generally speaking, those classic lines that transcended time were mostly about the author's bone-deep feelings and unimaginable experiences. However, this phrase was later used to describe a couple who had an extremely good relationship. Wasn't it a bit wrong to use this phrase? Since it came from Darso's, at least it couldn't be used to describe heterosexual love. As for what exactly happened in the room, in order not to be confused, it was better to just imagine it. In any case, there was only one sentence. Heterosexual love was for the sake of reproduction, while homosexual love was true love. What? I'm really not a senior member of the FFF mercenary group. This is the truth. There's no need to prove it. Why don't you just go out on the streets and ask some random people? Cough, cough, back to the main topic. Actually, it wasn't Renée's fault. She really didn't do it on purpose. Why would she think so much? All she did was leave the custody of a certain guardian and pay for the tuition of a certain demon prince. And even if she refused to pay, she probably wouldn't be able to stop that demon prince from collecting it himself. Getting back to the main topic, from a certain standpoint, it couldn't be said that Darso's had reached his current level because he had bad intentions or bad luck. Perhaps it was simply fate, or perhaps the god of fate didn't want this ambitious individual to have such a smooth life. No matter which generation Darso's was from, no matter if it was in politics or personal life, he definitely wasn't a good person. Yet, it seemed that he was just as unlucky. Compared to the Dark Elf Empress in history, Empress Rosemary was at least in a much better situation. Perhaps she would even have a descendant who could inherit the throne. Roland, an undead child? Wait a moment, I'm researching it right now. But no matter how complicated Roland's feelings were, how many times he vomited blood in private, and how many times he sought comfort from the Empress, the war still had to continue. Roland also had to act like he was full of fighting spirit and confidence. At the very least, he couldn't allow his personal feelings to affect national affairs, and he couldn't allow his wavering to affect the morale of the entire army on the battlefield. Roland had a smile on his face every day as he inspected the soldiers and held meetings. If Roland knew that Roland was working so hard, he would probably give him a thumbs up and praise him. You've worked so hard. Sacrificing yourself for the sake of the people, you're truly a good public servant of the Ottoman people. As for Renée, she might even hold a celebration party to celebrate Darso's misfortune. After all, ever since she was born, Darso's was the person she hated the most because he had threatened her. If it wasn't for Roland's appearance, perhaps the Donglan Principality would have become a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire. Even Renée herself would have married someone she didn't like or even know. That was why she didn't even try to hide her dissatisfaction towards Darso's. But on another level, even though they were at war for a long time, the Ottoman Empire still obediently carried out the aid contract with the Donglan Principality. Although there was the fatal restriction of the Devil's Contract, There were still loopholes in the contract. The Ottoman Empire even delivered more aid resources than usual. This was also a favor and an investment. That was why Renée arrived. The moment she arrived in the city, she was already known by the Ottoman people. There were even queues lining the streets to welcome her. The Ottoman people still remembered the astonishing performance of the angelic Renée in the arena. The Ottoman nobles and knights still remembered how this knight princess charged into the enemy's territory alone in order to save her family and friends. In their hearts, the young knight princess was already the role model of an ancient knight. As for the filth and infighting, it was impossible for ordinary citizens to know about it. Only the higher-ups of both sides knew about it. On the surface, it was the friendly alliance between both sides. The young knight princess won the recognition of the emperor with her outstanding courage and abilities. Considering the princess' potential, the emperor made an inexplicable decision. He took the initiative to change her country from a subordinate to an equal one and gave her a large amount of aid resources. The emperor who recognized talent soon received rewards. The knight princess returned to her homeland and made her homeland stronger. She even defeated the ferocious beastman army. And now, when the Ottoman Empire is in trouble, the knight princess brought her knight order to fulfill her duty as an ally. Alright, this was what the outside world thought. It could totally be made into a good drama. But although it seemed completely logical, it was actually far from the truth. It was like the difference between life on the news and reality. Actually, no matter which world it was the same. By the time the official media made an announcement, who knew how many things had already happened? Naturally, it was impossible to completely equate it with the truth. The result was quite amusing. The leaders of both countries had opinions about each other. But in the eyes of outsiders, the two countries had an excellent relationship with each other. They had even reached an agreement on military and economic matters. Just look at the Ottoman Empire's endless aid resources. They even sent a knight to the north as reinforcements. Donlon even gave the Ottoman Empire their national treasure, the floating battleship technology. The two countries are basically brothers wearing the same pants. And from a certain standpoint, this wasn't wrong. At the very least, when a country's empress was completely leaning towards a certain country, this unique alliance might last for a very long time. Let's get back to the main topic. This was the 68th counterattack, and it was also the most important counterattack. The strategic target of the attack was the former docks area. That's right, the area where the underwater base was located. It was the Ottoman Empire's most important strategic target. But now, it was the playground of a bunch of gigantic sea beasts. Alright then, we all knew that the strategic point had changed. A certain person had secretly taken away the most important treasure. However, he didn't take things too far. He left behind all the information and equipment that were inconvenient to take away. For the Ottoman Empire, as long as this chest was opened, the treasure within would definitely be worth any sacrifice. Of course, that certain person never had any good intentions. He had always been waiting for the other party to open the chest. His slightly more advanced design ideas and key technology that just happens to be lacking had long since become impatient. Once the other party unlocked their technology tree, my salesman would immediately arrive. High-tech products packed into boxes and delivered to your doorstep. Once you have one, you'll save 10 years of hard work. It's not 988, not 688, and definitely not 488. It's only 418. 418. If you buy one set, you'll get 2 free random lottery chests containing top-level magical engineering technology. If you buy 2 sets, you'll get 5 free random lottery chests. You've got a Roland brand New Year gift pack. Exclusive business. What are you hesitating for? Hurry up and call the order hotline. What? You want to specifically ask for a certain key technology? You don't want to draw? Dear customer, you don't seem to understand the industry. Do you know what an exclusive business is? It means that only I'm selling it, and I can sell it however I want. I have the final right to explain, while you only have the right to make suggestions. You can say it's fine, but I don't know if I'll listen or not. Do you know what a random lottery and bundled sale is? It means that before you buy what you want, you'll first buy a bunch of free gifts for me. Do you know what it means to save 10 years of hard work once you have one? It means that if you don't buy it, you'll forever fall behind by 10 years. How can ordinary players possibly defeat players with money? It was a pity that this advertisement that Roland personally wrote wasn't used in the end. The main reason was that it was too malicious. Considering how a certain emperor's mood was getting worse and worse, Rosemary was worried that Dasos wouldn't be able to hold it in any longer and would directly die. Thus, she tossed the matter of the transaction to the Empire's Prime Minister, Hermit. And so, it was Hermit's turn to be angered to the point of having to send a priest for emergency treatment. Let's not think about the future for now. Right now, let's focus back on the past. Since the war broke out at dawn, it symbolized the Ottoman Empire's all-out counterattack. And so, the counterattack codenamed Operation Daybreak began. And at this time, Renée met with unexpected reinforcements. They were 3 full-fledged knight squadrons. The most eye-catching among them was a group of grayish-black elves. Their emblem was a crescent moon, and their battle flag also had traces of a full moon. And one of their leaders was someone that Renée was familiar with. Diana? Victoria? Why are you guys here as well? Chapter 361. There was probably no need to investigate how Victoria met up with Diana, but from a certain standpoint, the passionate meeting between a queen and a king in history was even more noteworthy. Unfortunately, relationships between people were often affected by many factors. Although the two lovers had indeed met at a banquet, there hadn't been much of a commotion between them. Those who knew the truth felt that it was a pity. Yep, that insider was none other than Roland himself, who had been taking pleasure in Diana's misfortune the entire time. Aren't you afraid that if Dasos really falls in love with Victoria and finds out that the woman he loves still likes other women, he'll be so desperate that he'll turn gay and come looking for you? Alright then, of course, such an unreliable threat wouldn't scare Roland too much. But the price of being disgusted was that the silly cat would be brutally abused afterwards. But now, on the eve of war, the arrival of the 2 female elves and the Moonlight Goddess's army was undoubtedly a good thing. Eternal praise to our great moon goddess Patricia. May her love encompass us, may her light illuminate our path, and may her gaze always be with us. The Moonlight Goddess Patricia was a powerful god under Ale. As a powerful true god, she had many divine concepts, including moon and moonlight, guardian of the lost, dormant, dream, purify, watch, and hunt. Although she belonged to the elven faction, her believers included humans, elves, rangers, professional hunters, and so on. She also had many armed forces under her command, but she had actually been quite close to Ale for a long time. But after she transformed most of her divine power into a starlight net, she had fallen to mid-level divine power. The starlight net would become a tracking and surveillance device across the entire mortal plane. Any otherworldly existence that entered the mortal plane would be discovered immediately. The Moonlight Goddess would become even more powerful as she obtained merits and believers, and the priests of the Moonlight Goddess Church would become the most reliable tracking hounds. Originally, doing this much would have been more than enough. However, as one of the most loyal supporters of the Air faction, she didn't intend to remain a nobody under the main god's protection. In fact, she even took action before the Holy War began. She was one of the powerful gods to begin with. Once she started a war, she would have many believers. And because she had been fighting against Rose and the other evil gods for a long time, she had many powerful warriors among her believers. Once they were armed and organized, they would become a truly powerful force. Since the warriors were loyal followers of Ale, they naturally became members of the Contract Heroes. This time, they took the initiative to participate in this battle. The Grey Elves under the moonlight were the collective name of the former Dark Elves who had chosen the path of justice, and the moonlight's sacred emblem on their arms was their symbol. Following Rose's downfall, the originally suppressed Dark Elves also had a chance to make a new choice. In just 2 short years, the number of Grey Elves had increased by more than 10 times. If it weren't for the fact that time was still too short, their numbers would have increased explosively. Meanwhile, Diana, who was searching for the source of her faith, responded to her god's call and joined the Grey Elves in battle. However, perhaps only she knew that her journey alone wasn't for the sake of pursuing faith. On the contrary, it was because she had gotten too close to the gods and understood the truth about the gods that her faith was about to collapse. It seemed to be an expedition in pursuit of glory, but more than that, it was an escape from the truth. Faith was incredibly common in this world. In fact, it was a concept that actually existed. And to most mortals, true gods were existences far more important than their own lives. It was no exaggeration to say that a true god's will was more important than one's own life. As a holy knight, Diana used to believe in the holy light and hoped that the holy light would point out the path of salvation for her. But one day, a certain man casually said something that almost caused her faith in the holy light to collapse. As a holy knight, you don't believe in the God of holy light? Of course I don't believe in the God of holy light. I only believe in the divine light itself. Who would worship an existence that has no sense of self? That man, or perhaps I should say that he was the incarnation of a certain god in the Achi continent, showed her the truth about the gods. Or, more accurately, he used his actions to tell her that the gods were nothing special. They were just slightly older, slightly more powerful ancient existences, and that all of their miracles could be explained by the natural laws. If that was all there was to it, she could still accept it. But what Diana found the most difficult to accept was his understanding of the true gods. It would have been fine if he was purely an anti-god, but he just happened to have divine favor that nobody could understand. It could even be said that he was a god himself. In the future, if you choose to study law, I'd also advise you not to worship the god of law himself. Instead, you should study law itself, understand it, love it, and even become a faith. And if you're unable to recognize everything that law represents, then you should unhesitatingly give up on it. Worship is the furthest distance from the truth. Faith? Of course I have faith. Otherwise, how could I possibly become the guardian of law? You feel that there's something different? Of course, it's different. To be honest, I feel that your faith is filled with utilitarianism, which makes me feel quite uncomfortable. Your faith is far too impure. Rich merchants worship the goddess of wealth because they hope that she'll bestow them with fortune. Farmers worship the god of harvest because they hope that they'll be able to have a good harvest next year. The god of war's faith has never been broken, but that's because victory in battle is forever the sweetest thing ever. Perhaps I'm the most devout believer here. I believe in the true God only because I agree with the ideals that he represents. I believe that law is correct, which is why I promote law. I hope that law will be able to make the world better, but I don't hope that law will do anything for me personally. Pure faith? Diana understood Roland's words and thought about it. However, she almost ended up becoming a former holy knight. From a certain standpoint, this female knight was far too pure. Pure to the point of being cute, pure to the point of being silly. Because she was pure, she refused the many temptations and desires of the dark elf world. Because she was pure, she believed that the holy light could save her entire species. Because she was pure, she had pure faith. She gave everything to the holy light, which actually allowed her to grow even stronger. But in the end, because she was pure, she listened to a certain person's lies and almost tormented herself to death. Actually, every generation had a different understanding of faith. In a certain dark generation on Earth, Diana's attitude of giving everything to the gods was the choice of most people. Believing in a certain god, even after death, even one's soul would be returned to that god's divine kingdom. However, a certain person's understanding of gods and faith leaned towards the end of the Age of Chaos. That was, I think you're fine, so I'll follow you. But if you deviate from your original beliefs, I'm sorry, but I'll have to rebel against you. Faith? Divine power server? You're a god, but you're looking down on the gods? The most dangerous part was that even Roland didn't know about his identity being leaked. Womian's was the Lich Roland, and the Lich Roland was the Holy Knight Roland. When Diana saw this, the female Holy Knight felt that this was the same as a true god speaking the truth. Perhaps as long as we recognize and understand the concepts and teachings that the gods represent, we'll be able to borrow the gods' power. In that case, perhaps we can also take the initiative to steal the gods' power and even become true gods. Alright then, it was quite obvious that Diana had misunderstood Roland's words. She was simply thinking about how to obtain more power. This was indeed the mainstream view in this world. Most people who became Holy Knight didn't believe in the Holy Light from the very start. They only believed in the Holy Light to earn a living and obtain power. Most other Divine Job class members were like this as well. However, the price for obtaining power was that they were offering their everything to the gods. Even in death, Holy Light Job class members were still Holy Light Job class members. So-called former Holy Light Job class members had most likely been hunted down and killed. Due to Rose's death, the Dark Elves' divine world directly collapsed, and a large number of former priests and Divine Job class members appeared. Many Dark Elves lost their purpose in life after losing their faith in Rose. However, many former priests and Holy Knights who lost their power were constantly searching for new sources of power. One such example was Diana's younger sister, Victoria. It would have been fine if Diana had been the only one thinking about this. However, her younger sister just happened to be a former High Priestess candidate for Rose. She had access to a tremendous amount of God's knowledge, and she had many former Rose priests working under her. She herself was also an excellent priest. When Diana communicated her thoughts with her younger sister, she decided to experiment. That's right, it was her, not them. Diana still belonged to the Standard Order and Good faction, while Victoria was a typical Dark Elf. She would only care about the results, and wouldn't care about the process or sacrifices. In this idealistic world, there were many times when there wasn't only one correct answer. Extreme stubbornness could even create another path. This 1.5 years of exploration had already given birth to creations that shouldn't have appeared in this world. Desecration priests and anti-holy knight, divine power stealers and divine job desecrators. Roland would never have imagined that his casual words would create such a ridiculously powerful job class. In this battle, the first to suffer were the Sea Tribe. From the very start, the main characters of this battle weren't the Ottoman Empire. Instead, it was the girls from the Northlands. On this excellent stage, the new Northlands faction showed off their astonishing potential. Chapter 362. The battle wasn't going well. It should be said that not a single person had any optimistic expectations for this battle. The main strategic target was the docks of the main battlefield, which was currently several dozen meters underwater. The Sea Tribe referred to this area as the Dragon's Graveyard. The blood of the semi-god nine-headed dragon dripped here, and although the remaining dragon blood was highly toxic to ordinary lifeforms, it was still irresistibly attractive to other sea beasts. A large number of giant sea beasts gathered there. In order to reach the Dragon's Graveyard, the Sea Tribe would have to kill at least 10 street blocks of the Sea Tribe. Once the battle reached a stalemate, it was likely that the Sea Tribe's reinforcements would soon arrive. That was why Dasos and his advisors had done their homework for this battle. Out of the 60 or so previous counterattacks, at least 10 of them had chosen to break through the Dragon's Graveyard. This wasn't only for the sake of gathering information and eliminating potential threats, it was also a psychological tactic to numb the Sea Tribe. The Dragon's Graveyard is being attacked again? I really don't understand why humans like to attack this place. Who cares what they're doing? Just leave it to the sea beasts to deal with. Actually, for the current sea tribe, the most important strategic point was their royalty and divine temple. The second most important was their various entertainment facilities. As for the original docks where the sea beasts gathered, did the sea tribe even need boats? They would rather raise pigs or sea beasts there. Out of the previous 5 attacks, 2 of them had chosen to break through the dragon's graveyard. Perhaps the sea tribe's deployment was still quite timely, but the frontline warriors had already sharply discovered that the sea tribe's reactions had begun to slow down. At the very least, the reinforcements from other locations had arrived 30% later than before, and the number of reinforcements had decreased by at least half. Since the sea tribe had already become numb to such attacks, it was now time to launch a true counterattack. Dawn had arrived. There was still more than an hour before the warm sunlight would illuminate this world. Right now, most of the sea tribe were still in a deep sleep. They would only wake up after 9 o'clock in the morning, and this was the time of the day when they slept the most soundly. Unlike the pitch-black depths of the sea tribe began to imitate the schedules of other species after feeling the warmth of the sun. However, perhaps from the day when the sea tribe believed that they had already achieved victory and arrogantly gave up the initiative in this battle, they were destined to meet such a fate. As the instigators of the war, the Ottoman Empire did not hesitate to stand at the forefront. In that battle and the civil strife, their main fleet suffered heavy losses. The 3 major fleets were all scattered, but in this counterattack, the number of warships that participated in the war and the new warships added up to more than 30 heavy warships and 100 medium warships. This was the confidence of a mega-empire. Once they entered a period of war, a large number of civilian and commercial industries would be converted into military industries. If they couldn't crush them in a single move, their deep foundation of industry would drag any opponent into a hell of a long war. Obviously, the original battleships wouldn't be able to fight in such an environment. The water here was too shallow and the water was too complicated. Even in areas with deep drains, a building that was previously on land might become a fatal reef. However, it was impossible to fight against the sea tribe in the water without a battleship. Originally, the Ottoman Empire had fallen into a dilemma. However, after obtaining the technology for floating battleships, they finally came up with a solution. The valuable information from the Northlands had already been spread to every single Ottoman shipyard. All the shipwrights and designers hadn't rested since that day. The Ottoman Empire focused all of its efforts on modifying their own ship. It was still impossible for the Ottoman Empire to completely float in the air. They would have to design, choose materials, enchant, and assemble the ship bit by bit from the keel. However, it was possible to simply install floating engines, reduce the ship's total weight, and lower the ship's draft. Perhaps this didn't seem meaningful, but it actually provided a possibility. The bottom of the ship would be fully metallized. If the ship was lighter, there would be extra buoyancy. Wouldn't it be possible to install heavy armor on the ship? And so, with the help of countless blacksmiths, the thick protective armor was patched on. In order to ensure that the armor would be strong enough to crush a reef without being damaged, the Ottoman Empire madly used precious magical metals. Magical metals were treasures that ordinary adventurers wouldn't even be willing to use to create weapons. According to the post-war statistics, the magical metals used on the ships had caused the Ottoman Empire's treasury to lose 1/5 of its wealth. That was enough to rebuild the capital of Kajisi. At a time when ironclad warship technology was still immature and engine technology was still lacking, Alan's shipsmiths had actually combined floating technology and created a half-finished ironclad warship. It was truly a sight to behold. Unlike their cousins on Earth, ironclad ships here didn't need to worry about the cannons used to defend against other ships. Instead, they needed to worry about the reefs that they might encounter at the bottom of the ship. Once the engine technology was mastered, true heavy ironclad ships would definitely arrive in this era. But for now, these half-finished ironclad ships were more than enough. Compared to the original ships, they had even more astonishing defensive capabilities. Since they were equipped with an excessive amount of anti-gravity engines, they also had the ability to float in the air for a short period of time. Dasos, not enough buoyancy? Then let's build more engines. If they overload and explode, we'll just replace them with new ones. Bring enough workers to the ships. We have mages to provide magic power. We have enough industrial capacity. We have money. Be willful. The people of this world weren't stupid. When an intelligent species was pushed to their limits, all sorts of seemingly wonderful modifications would achieve miraculous results that regular armies would never be able to achieve. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that the Ottoman Empire's metallurgy, especially the forging of alloys, surpassed all other countries' industrial standards, even if they had such ideas, they wouldn't have been able to achieve them. Alright, the most important thing was that the Ottoman Empire was rich enough. War was a competition of overall national strength. As super rich, the Ottoman Empire could be willful. In order to cover up the fragile wooden planks that didn't have any armor, and in order to fight at night, these battleships were painted black. In the near future, these black battleships that always brought doom to their enemies would be called death battleships. This was doubtlessly a trump card. Even during the most dangerous times on the battlefield, even though countless warriors' bodies became meat targets for the sea tribe in the water, these modified battleships were still repeatedly modified in their warehouses. They had no intention of being used on the battlefield at all. This type of modified battleship can achieve miraculous results the first time it's used on the battlefield. What kind of trump card is this if it can't be used at a critical moment and obtain the strategic key that will determine the outcome of the battle? As an emperor, Dasos was obviously incredibly ruthless, and right now all the sacrifices had been made. This trump card that had been hidden for so long had achieved astonishing results. Nobody was able to stop this black battleship as it traveled through the night. Their gigantic bodies were incredibly agile, and if they got stuck on a reef, they would be able to float for a short period of time in the air, which was even more inconceivable. There were no more reefs in the water where these heavy battleships passed. In fact, there weren't even any large sea tribe members. Their sturdy hulls were more than enough to flatten everything. When the alarm bells rang, the sea tribe members had no idea how to deal with such battleships when they first arrived on the battlefield. Dig through the bottom of the battleships? The protective deck of the battleship was a combination of magical metal coating and steel plates, which was more than enough to deal with cannons. Although the sea giants' rusty anchors managed to pierce through the outer layer of the battleship, they were actually embedded in the battleship and dragged away. Toss giant waves to drown the sea giants? These battleships were far too stable. They were even capable of automatically adjusting the depth of the water. Ordinary water mages wouldn't be able to drown these huge iron blocks that could be adjusted by their anti-gravity engines. It would be better to use forbidden spells instead. Using cannons to attack the weakest parts of the sea tribe's upper body? The sea tribe didn't have cannons, and the sea tribe's mages were actually suppressed by the sea tribe's mages, who outnumbered them by more than 3 to 1. The Ottoman Empire's superiority in metallurgy and smithing was far too obvious. The Ottoman Empire's patented technologies, such as full-body alloy armor and exploding magical alloys, were the best evidence. The sea tribe's magical metal coating was still the Ottoman Empire's best alloy technology. Not to mention the sea tribe's cold weapons and hands, even ordinary fifth circle magic spells would be useless against it. Both sides had completely different attitudes towards this battle. Naturally, the results would be completely different. Unfortunately, even though the sea tribe and the sea tribe were both on the sea tribe's side, and even though the sea tribe's advance was relatively smooth, they still didn't have much of an advantage in the first half an hour of the battle. Although the sea tribe's advance was quite smooth, they didn't have the most anticipated spoils of war, a large number of casualties among the sea tribe. In such a special battlefield, it was impossible for the Sea Tribe to occupy the Sea Tribe's territory. Therefore, the Sea Tribe's first priority was to eliminate the Sea Tribe's forces. However, the result was disappointing. The Sea Tribe didn't have many casualties, and the number of high-level Sea Tribe members who died could be counted on one hand. The reason? No matter what, it was still the first reason: geographical advantage. Yes, the Sea Tribe couldn't do anything to the Sea Tribe's huge battleships, but the huge battleships couldn't do anything to the Sea Tribe either. For the Sea Tribe, as long as they could dive into the deep water and escape far away, what could the huge battleships that had to stay on the surface of the water do to them? The speed of these large pieces of iron was extremely slow. Attack with cannons? Even the stupidest commander wouldn't make such a decision. Magic attack? How much magic power could a mage gain from the seawater? Using a crossbow to shoot a huge harpoon? That would be useful, but the Sea Tribe with high intelligence wouldn't just stand there and watch the enemy attack. As long as the Sea Tribe could keep a distance, the harpoon would be useless. Send people into the water to chase after the Sea Tribe? This was an excellent idea. To the Sea Tribe, this was a stupid idea that was almost like colluding with the enemy. This was basically giving the Sea Tribe more food. The Sea Tribe had been waiting for the humans to chase after them for far too long. On the flagship of the Sea Tribe's fleet, the evil shark, Dasos was also secretly anxious. He had considered many situations in his battle simulation, but the Sea Tribe's losses were still less than he had expected. It was possible to achieve the strategic goal of reducing the Sea Tribe's forces. In that case, even if the Sea Tribe conquered the docks, the Sea Tribe's subsequent counterattack would be astonishing. Not to mention, these modified battleships weren't invincible. As time passed, their weaknesses would also be discovered. Meanwhile, on the floating battleship in the clouds, Renée and the others were also looking at the battlefield in astonishment. Perhaps it was because her continuous victories had given her confidence that she didn't think too highly of the Ottoman Empire, which had repeatedly suffered losses at Roland's hands. But today, when she saw these suddenly rising battleships, she finally understood what it meant to be a superpower. The Donglon Principality was also building battleships. In terms of technology, they were even ahead of the Ottoman Empire. However, there wasn't a single decent shipyard in the entire Donglon Principality. Not only that, their metallurgy and smithing techniques were extremely backward. Otherwise, they wouldn't have forced Roland to use necromancy to build battleships. But even so, the resources and funds required to build a large battleship were astronomical. Even the maintenance costs after it was built weren't cheap. The Aurora battleship was a living battleship. Envy would devour and evolve itself to recover from its injuries, so that it wouldn't drain the entire treasury of Donglon. As for the other few large battleships, Roland didn't even consider building them in Donglon. He directly sent them to the Undead Empire, the Shiloh Empire, to build them. From a blueprint to a real product, countless processes were required. Materials, craftsmanship, manpower, and many other aspects needed to be tackled. Due to the fact that they had the completed battleships, skilled workers, designers, equipment, Roland had obtained an entire industrial chain from the Ottoman Empire. He was able to directly digest this top-notch technology. It was also because of this that the Donglon Empire was still the only country in the world that possessed mature floating battleship technology. Even if Donglon sold a portion of the technology, it would still take several years for the other countries' floating battleships to reach combat strength. Renée had always treated this as her trump card, and she was vaguely proud of it. The White Wolf Knight, whose entire crew is silver-ranked, is rampaging through the human world? Our Aurora Knight is made up of gold-rank soldiers. The Ottoman Empire's alchemy, smithing, and metallurgy are known throughout the world, but they are still unable to overcome the technology of floating battleships. It seems that the Ottoman Empire is nothing. But now the Death Fleet had shattered her confidence. Just the potential of this industry, The vast territory, the rich resources, and the huge population was enough to easily crush Donglan. Once the two countries go to war, as the leader of a country, such assumptions would never be unnecessary. After all, in the interactions between countries, there were only absolute benefits and no absolute friends. There were too many cases of yesterday's allies becoming today's mortal enemies. For some reason, she recalled the time when she asked Roland why he insisted on rebuilding the industrial system when the country was still troubled by the problems of the people's livelihood. Roland's answer was then, "It's not that I'm a war maniac and the entire country is preparing for war. It's just that war is unavoidable." What? You're saying that even if we don't have a complete industrial system, we only need the Borealis to win the war? You're underestimating those big countries. Perhaps their single warship strength isn't enough to deal with our advanced warships, but they only have 10 warships while we only have 1. They're not afraid of damage, they can just rebuild again. It doesn't matter if their soldiers die, they can just recruit more. What about us? We only have so little assets. Without an industrial system, it means that we lack the ability to produce blood. Without a complete industrial system, we won't be able to deal with a prolonged war. Right now, the Donglan Principality is actually on top of a volcano. It looks beautiful, but it's actually being roasted on top of a volcano. Big countries can lose countless times, but they can afford to lose. As for us, if we take one wrong step, we will never be able to climb out of the abyss. I don't want to gamble with my country. At this moment, facing the harsh reality and recalling Roland's seemingly meaningful words, Renée finally saw the difference between Donglan and the big countries in the continent. At least for now, there was no comparison at all. And this is only a mega-empire. Renée wasn't an idiot. The moment she discovered the difference, she adjusted her entire strategy. Then, she discovered Roland's true intention of integrating the entire Northlands. The Mist Alliance? Indeed, just Donglan alone wouldn't be enough. But if Slowir and the other Northlands countries were included, the situation would be different. Roland had always been integrating the Northlands countries economically, politically, and commercially. Actually, he had long since prepared for this. Big Brother Roland probably isn't thinking about just that. What else does he intend to do? If it's the Mist Alliance, then the Casmi Dukedom, which is a vassal of San Antonio, will be too difficult to deal with. And in order to pull out this nail and make San Antonio stop from invading the Northlands, he'll need the support of the other mega-empires. No wonder Big Brother Roland not only invited the major countries to the military parade and celebration, he even gave them so many benefits in terms of technology exchange. Right, there's also the envoys from the major countries. Big Brother Roland has always been too lazy to deal with things. He even personally read the letters. The matter of the Northlands dwarves and elves is obviously quite difficult to deal with, but he actually took the initiative to deal with it. There's also the recent diplomatic relations with the Northlands countries. Even though the Mist Alliance's proposal to abolish all tariffs and allow citizens to freely travel to and from the Northlands countries wasn't interested, he actually insisted on negotiating. Also, he's always sending letters to Big Sister Gleena. Then, the two countries made a joint political declaration. Although the matter itself isn't that important, it seems to show that they're on the same side. And that matter, just how many things has he done in secret? Roland didn't hide his own actions towards his companions. But now that she was able to understand Roland's strategic plans on her own, Renée was one step closer to becoming a mature leader. Now that she had a correct understanding of Roland and Donglan's position in the world, as well as their strategic plans, she knew what she needed to do. I originally intended to just watch the show and let the Ottoman Empire and the Sea Tribe both suffer heavy losses before taking advantage of the situation. But now, it seems that while this might be fine for me as an individual, it's far too petty for me as a representative of an entire country. What we need now is to prove our strength to the world in a dignified manner, as well as obtain as much support as we can. This will make the Ottoman Empire owe us even more favors and repay us even more in the future. In that case, since the battle has reached a stalemate, it's time for us to break this stalemate and perform on the stage. How could adding icing on the cake compare to providing timely assistance? Fence-sitters would always be annoying. Since she had already made up her mind, what was there to hesitate about? Aurora Knight Squadron, Silver Cross Squadron, move out. Borealis, deploy new weapons. Chapter 363. The 4 Elemental Swordcasters? They're just some low-quality magic swordsmen who rely on their equipment. It's impossible to mass-produce mages that require talent. Even if they rely on their equipment to learn magic, how can they possibly reach that level with their limited talent? How can they possibly understand the true meaning of magic when even their mana source has to rely on their equipment? They're nothing more than rookies who will never be able to advance in power level. Even after spending so many resources, can't we just find a few young mages with outstanding talent and focus on nurturing them? It'll be worth it to produce an archmage. After the 4 elemental swordcasters astonishingly revealed themselves in Red Maple City, praise wasn't the only thing waiting for them. Weaknesses such as poor mana endurance, lack of high-level spells, and difficulty in advancing in power level were all pointed out by others. While the major countries were reassured by this, it also stopped them from trying to introduce this new job class. The major countries were quite interested in magical engineering's creations, but this new job class was unexpectedly given the cold shoulder. Most people were skeptical of this new job class. However, if even the archmages of the Cloud Tower had the same opinion, then it was quite obvious that there was a problem. After all, the Cloud Tower's archmages had the highest authority among mages. Indeed, although this new job class would allow ordinary people to control mana, it would be quite difficult for them to advance further as they lacked magic perception and elemental attraction talent. Not to mention, even 10 low-level rookies wouldn't be able to defeat a single high-level mage. It was only natural that a job class with no prospects for development would be doubted. Perhaps Brother Roland was thinking about the strategic importance of the spellcasters gathering. Even Renée, who worshipped Roland the most, could only defend herself in such a manner. Talent? Is it edible? Roland responded to the doubtful gazes. He indeed had the right to be proud of himself. As a student who broke the record for failing magic classes, and as a magical idiot who had been denied the path of being a mage by several dozen teachers, he managed to become an archmage of 2 truths of truth one step at a time. It was quite convincing for him to say that talent was useless. However, exceptions were incredibly difficult to replicate. Even Roland had to admit that it was almost a miracle that he was able to reach his current level. Would there be another Roland among the several hundred 4 elemental swordcasters? The answer was obviously no. Actually, only a single-digit number of 4 elemental swordcasters had managed to advance to silver in the past year or so. The fact that those who advanced to silver in power level would always have natural talent as mages made most supporters feel discouraged. East Mist, with its limited resources, had an internal discussion on whether or not to continue expanding the 4 elemental swordcasters as planned. After all, East Mist wasn't rich yet. It wasn't like a large empire that had money but nowhere to spend it. Investing in a long-term project with no foreseeable future would be quite extravagant. Faced with so many doubts, Donglon wasn't rich at all. It would be far too wasteful to invest in a long-term with no future. Elemental swordcasters would swordcasters. Swordcasters. Swordcasters are far too elemental swordcasters. Is no swordcasters purely and only power classes work? God. That. Power level combat is through war. That war is power. In combat is s. That's because war was the best way to test one's abilities. Being able to obtain outstanding combat results on the battlefield would naturally be able to stop all criticism. The Borealis engines were fully activated. The gigantic beasts hiding in the clouds began to awaken. Searchlights illuminated the sky, and the next instant, the Borealis hatch opened. The Aurora Knights rode the light of the Aurora as they tore through the sky, while several hundred swordcasters descended from the sky. Only when they could see the ground clearly did they activate the light on their back. Bright orange flames lit up the sky as streaks of light tore through the sky and flew towards their chosen targets. These 4 elemental swordcasters didn't descend by themselves. They were all carrying heavy backpacks. Ordinary flying spells were no longer able to carry them. Unlike the slow and short flying spells of the past, these mobile backpacks that spat out magical flames were both fast and powerful. But if an ordinary person were to use these backpacks, they would be no different from an unlucky gnome riding on a goblin rocket. They would have to use their lives to think about how to get back down. However, only the 4 elemental swordcasters who had gone through magical control training were able to precisely control the intensity of the flames, control the wind, and control their own direction. And in order to better control their backpacks, they were currently inserting their magic swords into the backpacks' control centers to take their place in command. The first team will be on the surface and clear out the shoals of fish harassing the airship. The second team will be underwater to snipe down high-threat targets. The third team will patrol in the sky. I'll leave backup and bombing missions to all of you. After this order was given, each team tore open their large backpacks, revealing all the equipment they had prepared beforehand. The first team was a small, single-person speedboat called Dolphin No. 1. The metal hull of the speedboat only had a place to stand and an engine. The pilot had to stand on the speedboat that was less than 2 meters long, but he had to use chains to tie himself to the speedboat. Otherwise, he might be thrown off at any moment. The powerful engine allowed the speedboat to travel at high speeds on the water. It was even faster than the flying fish. The fourth team swam around the airship, choosing smaller targets to kill. The weapons they were equipped with were all insanely heavy firepower. Dolphin No. 1's firepower platform was actually equipped with a revolving machine gun. The 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers needed to insert their magic swords into the speedboat's control center, and then enchant the bullets with armor-piercing, acceleration, explosion, and other support abilities. Finally, all they needed to do was pull the trigger on the target. At this moment, the speedboat and heavy firepower had both become extensions of the swordcasters. This new job class that had been deemed to have no future at all showed off its own unique combat style. 3 speedboats whizzed past the sea giant like a raging storm. The roaring cannons pierced hundreds of holes in the sea giant's body, and the powerful golden giant collapsed just like that. The second team's underwater crew had breathing tanks and diving equipment. The Sea Otter prototype, a special backpack that could be used in both water and air, would convert fire magic into water magic once it entered the water, making it even more agile than the Murlocs underwater. The special harpoon guns they were equipped with were only backup weapons. In the water, even a temporary icicle would be more than enough to kill the unarmored sea tribe. The second team's goal was to snipe the mages that were hidden underwater, eliminating any possible threat to the airship. Impossible! The Sea Tribe members were astonished to discover that there were actually existences that were faster and more agile than they were underwater. Archmage Naga, who had been preparing to cast a spell, was instantly pierced through by a harpoon. Even though she had reached the frightening peak of legend rank, there was no such thing as an absolutely safe place on the battlefield. Naga, who believed herself to be absolutely safe, actually didn't have any defenses at all. She was pierced through without any resistance, and this allowed the second team to be the first to receive their spoils of war. The third team was not equipped with any powerful weapons, but in fact they had the largest number of people. They were all carrying oil barrels filled with explosives. Alright then, this was a simple remote-controlled deep water bomb. Team 2's underwater operators would provide their teammates with coordinates, call for firepower support, and provide the most suitable time to explode. Every time an oil barrel dived into the water and exploded, there would be a bunch of seafolk's corpses on the surface of the water. Even if the seafolk were only knocked unconscious, it would still be the same as a death sentence if they appeared unconscious on the surface of the water. Happy frying fish, this is a good harvest. A 7, I'm going to the next target. Over. After notifying his underwater companions, the bombers floated back into the air and went to retrieve a depth charge from the Borealis. However, what they had to do was not just simple airstrike missions. They had to protect their comrades and provide logistical energy sources. The 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers' excellent performance even astonished the gold-ranked Aurora Knight. Compared to the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers, the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers were only bronze-ranked on average. However, their combat results far surpassed the gold-ranked Frigid Maw Knight. The Aurora Knight was indeed a powerful troop type that was highly suited for fighting on the surface of the water. They were capable of freezing the surface of ice and running on water. However, their attacking methods were still quite traditional. No matter if it was ice magic or physical attacks, the seafolk would be able to defend against them. Although the seafolk would still be completely suppressed, as long as the seafolk escaped deep into the ocean, the 4 elemental swordcasters wouldn't be able to chase after them. How could it be as simple and crude as a single deep water bomb? And at this moment, the 4 elemental swordcasters' advantage was fully displayed. They were able to control their own equipment as if they were using their limbs. They were able to choose equipment that suited them to the battlefield. The 4 elemental swordcasters were equipped with equipment that allowed them to fight on the surface of the water and underwater. They were even more suited to the battlefield than the seafolk. Indeed, the 4 elemental swordcasters were a job class that greatly relied on external items. However, was it really impossible to rely on external items? There was a certain civilization that relied on external items to reach the peak of the world. They invented external items that were capable of single-handedly destroying planets and entire world. High-level magic that couldn't increase one's magic power level? Would the gunmen in that world be able to increase their own power levels, increase the number of bullets, or make their guns spit fire? But actually, an ordinary warrior who had only completed basic training would be completely incomparable to an elite warrior who had experienced hundreds of battles. Just the ability to use weapons and piloting skills alone would be more than enough for the 4 elemental swordcasters to pursue. Weak? Lacking mobility? Perhaps it would be enough to equip them with mobile armor and iron horses. If they felt that their attack range or firepower wasn't enough, they could simply equip them with enhanced equipment. Insufficient magic power? Wouldn't it be enough to bring more? Who said that you could only bring one power source? Just look at those speedboat pilots. Just look at how they only brought 10 full Olivia's magic boxes and 3 magic sword. It's difficult to advance in power level by relying on external items. In that case, it would be enough to increase the level of an external item. This would actually be much easier than raising a high-level mage, and it could even be mass-produced. Are dwarven rifles and dwarven sniper cannons on the same level? The power of cannons combined with engineering will be increased by more than 10 times. Can a small tank even compare to a Roland Titan? Besides, I don't believe that it's impossible for the 4 elemental swordcasters to advance in power level. It's just that they've chosen the wrong direction to advance in power level. In the conference room where everyone was arguing, Roland personally showed off his newly invented sword seals and various magical sword technique. This was a job class that focused on technique over power. Since his magic power source was external, then perhaps researching new and powerful sword seals and creating new magical sword techniques was the correct direction for him to advance in power level. Swordcasters, they're just people who use swords. Don't be bound by the past. Why must you view them as mages? Take a look at the true usage of the 4 elemental swordcasters. The reason why they're called humans is because only humans in this world know how to use tools. This is also the foundational reason why they're able to advance in power level. Alright, I misspoke. Elves, beastmen, and dwarves are all fine, so please get off my back. Harloise, I've been feeling rather anemic recently. The 4 elemental swordcasters were magic users that originated from the field of magical engineering. They were born to be the best companions. They were the children of war, as well as the favorites of the new generation. As magical engineering continued to develop, they would only become stronger. And as long as there were enough foundational members, there would always be geniuses among them. Perhaps an ordinary mage would only have a 10% chance of advancing in power level, while the 4 elemental swordcasters would only have a 30% chance of advancing. However, after lowering the requirements for mages, it would be possible to produce more than 100 times the number of 4 elemental swordcasters. As long as there was enough time and enough foundational members, there would naturally be a day when there would be result. Of course, this power came with a price. Donglon already had more than 5,004 elemental swordcasters, but they only brought 200 with them. It wasn't that Renee felt that she had too many people, but rather that she only had enough equipment for 200 people. That was the only number that could be used on the battlefield. In order to further expand the power of this troop class with limitless potential, not only would they need resources and money, they would also need a country's industrial and educational power. This wasn't a problem that could be solved in a short period of time. Creating a single piece of engineering equipment only required engineers? Experts would be needed from the very beginning to design the equipment. The equipment's materials would need the support of the smithing and metallurgy industries. Enchanting and inscription arrays would need archmages skilled in enchanting. Alchemists would need to complete the mana transfer and energy circulation. Any single piece of equipment would require the support of several industries, and at least 10 people would need to work together. And if they wanted to create an assembly line for mass production, then the requirements for industrial standards would be even higher. Renee was able to understand Roland's strategy even better than the gold-ranked swordcasters when she saw the battle situation before her. These swordcasters, who weren't even bronze-ranked, had combat results that far surpassed the gold-ranked knight swordcasters. It seemed that from the very start, Roland had already seen a completely different generation from the current battlefield. Perhaps in future battles, ordinary melee weapon users would be abandoned. Magical swordcasters with special magical swords would replace the most basic warrior job class. The barrier to becoming an elemental user would become incredibly low, and mages would no longer be able to become gods. Magical engineering would replace their status as the kings of the battlefield. At that time, perhaps countries wouldn't be fighting over territory anymore. Instead, they would be fighting over various natural resources. Countries wouldn't be fighting over how many powerful individuals they had. Instead, they would be fighting over technology and craftsmanship. War would no longer be fought over by top-level combat strength. Naturally powerful dragons and giants would no longer be able to stand above everyone else. Trained mortals would become the main characters of this generation. Master craftsmen and engineers would replace the status of forbidden spell mages. Is this an invention that will change the world? Rain recalled the judgment I made when I first saw Olivia's magic box. Why did I decide to suppress all opposition with such an abnormally autocratic attitude? Why did I invest so much resources and manpower into this Olivia's magic box? Olivia's magic box was maliciously referred to as Olivia's bottomless pit? Perhaps I had anticipated this day from the very start. In fact, I was doing everything in my power to push forward these changes. Actually, Roland could see it quite clearly. Every industrial revolution was an opportunity for all countries to reshuffle their power. Being one step too slow would mean being one step too slow. There was no need to explain the consequences of falling behind. At the very least, we're now in the lead. And this lead will become our future resources and bargaining chip. That's right, Roland and his team were doubtlessly at the top of the world in this regard. Now that they had displayed outstanding combat strength here, Donlon would have even more political, military, and economic chips to play with. With a suitable platform to display their products, they would finally be able to sell their products for a high price. If I could see the situation of the future, Rain would be clenching her fists tightly. She could faintly see the possibility of her homeland becoming a mega-powerful country. Perhaps this holy war was also an opportunity for her people who had suffered far too much pain and suffering. We shall finally stand at the top of the world. Chapter 364. By the way, Roland, why haven't you been drawing the lottery recently? After becoming Roland's bound equipment, Harloise also received some benefit. She was quite curious about the system hidden within Roland's body. That system's ability to distort cause and effect was inconceivable. From a certain standpoint, as long as it was used well, it would be ridiculously powerful. I've drawn the lottery and I've failed once. Then why haven't I heard you mention it before? Harloise was quite astonished. With her understanding of Roland, if there were any benefits, he probably wouldn't hide it. Since he didn't brag about his good luck, then the results. Yep, there's no need to talk about the result. I've drawn 5 blue, 4 purple, and 1 orange out of 10 consecutive draws. Not bad. Why haven't I heard you mention it before? Recently, Harloise was also able to understand Roland's messy terminology. Blue meant excellent grade, purple meant epic grade, and orange meant legendary grade. 6 out of 10 draws would be epic grade or higher, which should be quite good. Let's not talk about the 5 times excellent quality draws. Although they aren't top-tier items, at least they're passable and will be of some help. Then the epic quality should be even better. Yep, I was so happy when I drew the first one. It was Kratos's Hand-to-Hand Combat Manual, Part 1. Kratos? Who's that? A vicious character who killed demons and dragon slayers. If I have to make an analogy, it's probably something like an ancient sword saint. Then aren't you happy? I flipped through it, and it's indeed that person. He killed an ancient god of war, single-handedly killed a 9-headed dragon, and fought against a giant stone statue monster. The first volume has his heroic deeds, and he swept through everything in his path. He's practically a god. I did some research, and there really was such a vicious person in the ancient era. Then why aren't you happy? The first volume is super thick, and it can be used as a brick. However, it only has heroic deeds, so I can only read it as a game guide. I mean, a night novel. How could I be happy? It just so happens that the last page of the first volume says that the second volume contains the forging recipe for his unique weapon, and the second volume contains his martial skills and battle experience. I get it. The first volume is useless, but the other volumes are useful. After that, you didn't get any other volumes. No wonder you're so depressed. No, I got the middle volume next time. It did contain the manufacturing method of the ancient artifact called the Sword of Chaos. What? Let me see. After hesitating for a moment, Roland handed him a thin booklet. That's all? If it's an ancient god artifact, from the materials used to make it, to the forging, to the enchantment, just the information alone is enough to fill a library. There was no need to say anything else. She opened the booklet and revealed an embarrassed expression. The words written on it were very simple. First, find 2 sturdy chains and tie them to 2 divine-level one-handed swords. Swing them a little. If the swords don't fly out, that's good enough. This ancient sword saint was truly an honest person. Yeah, he was too honest. Flip to the back. He even wrote how to obtain divine level one-handed sword. Kitten flipped through the booklet and became even more embarrassed. Find a god and kill him. Steal his weapon, and you'll obtain a divine level one-handed sword. If you kill a few more gods, you'll definitely obtain divine level one-handed swords. If your hands are too unlucky, you can just become a spy and wash your hands. However, this method has some limitations. For example, last time I found a stallion main god and finally killed him with great difficulty. In return, I obtained a top-level divine level two-handed sword. Unfortunately, I didn't learn the two-handed sword specialization, so I couldn't equip it. Tui, this drop is just too ridiculous. It's even bound to me, so I can't use it even if I wanted to. Heh, you're truly an honest person. Harloise forced herself to laugh twice in order to comfort Roland, who was becoming more and more annoyed. Good luck. Who knows, you might even get the second volume in the future. At the very least, the martial arts techniques in the second volume should be useful. Now that you mention it, I really did get the book Kratos's hand-to-hand combat manual again. Harloise looked at Roland sympathetically. Even though he tried his best to make it sound like he was in high spirits, judging from Roland's past luck, there was likely a problem with this. Is it that martial arts techniques can't be learned, or something else? No, although I got the book Kratos's hand-to-hand combat manual, this time, it's Kratos's hand-to-hand combat manual continuation. Last time, we didn't finish talking about my heroic deeds. Let's continue this time. I read for 2 hours and watched as the Spartan talked about how he fought against his semi-god brothers, how he provoked the Titans, and how he was hunted down by the Earth Mother Goddess. As expected of a heroic character with barbarian bloodline. He's really good at bragging. If what he said was true, then wouldn't he have defeated all the gods? The world would have been destroyed. How pitiful. Of the 4 myth-ranked items, 3 were like this. What's the 4th item? This time, it's Kratos's hand-to-hand combat manual continuation. I know that you didn't really believe me last time, so I'm going to tell you again. Everything that happened back then had witnesses and material evidence. Listen to me, that Titan was really huge, even bigger than a mountain, and that 9-headed dragon was really huge, even bigger than a ship. This time, I read it for 2 days and deeply understood the importance of universal language education in the barbarian tribes. Forget about the typos, he actually didn't use any punctuation. Do you know how frightening it is for someone with OCD to constantly break sentences? I read it for 2 days and spent half a month trying to fix the punctuation. You really finished reading it? After all, he was a super powerful individual from ancient times. Perhaps he had some absolute secrets, but in the end, stop scowling. It's a myth-ranked item? It should be something good. Is it a god equipment? In a way it really is. It's Kratos's full set of armor. It's the real thing. Didn't you become rich? Wait a moment, you said that Kratos was born a barbarian. Yep, no matter if it's ancient times or now, barbarians always go into battle naked. As expected of Kratos, he's one of the better ones. He's wearing a set of armor, and it's rated as a legendary ranked equipment by the system. You mean that? Yep, a shit yellow strawberry panty, and it's the original flavor. Do you want it? I'll give it to you for free. Disgusting. Hurry and throw it away. You're actually carrying such a disgusting thing around with you. I can't do anything about it. It's the same as that ancient double-edged sword. This thing is actually bound to me. I can't throw it away even if I want to. Come, try it on. Amidst the chaos, Roland confirmed that even Harloise was unable to equip this soul-bound glowing panty. He could only helplessly take out a large number of straps and tie it up before tossing it into his personal dimensional pocket. This is such a trap. At the very least, those elite-ranked ones are useful. Yep, elite ranked ones are a special type of card. Every single one of them has a rune on it. As long as I gather all of the Sanyong Kaitai cards, I'll be able to obtain a god-ranked equipment that Kratos once used. I've asked the system this time, and it said that it's not a scam, and that it's definitely a good item. You have 5 of them? Didn't that mean you got them? Sanyong Kaitai only has 4 characters, right? Yep, although I got 2 sheep characters, I did get those 4 characters, but, I didn't get an exclamation mark. It's just. That scammer actually wanted Sanyong Kaitai. Not a single one of the 5 runes can't be missing, even the punctuation marks count. Actually, you can always draw more. One day you'll get it. Heh, where do you think 418's ridiculous idea of selling and drawing came from? After that I drew? Comma, colon, and there were even ellipses and question marks. System, are you kidding me? Sanyong Kaitai? Why didn't I get those damned exclamation marks? I can understand how you feel, but please relax. That's just how drawing a lottery is. There'll always be people who lose and people who win. Heh, I've never won before. Relax. I already have a way to soothe my mood. Whenever I'm frustrated, I'll feel better if someone else shares my pain. I've already communicated with the Justice Points system. If you want to obtain my treasures, fine, go ahead and draw. 418 is only the beginning. There's still 688, 1088 waiting for you. Our goal is to draw until you shout that chopping off your hand is useless, until you actually chop off your hand. You should just chop off your hand first. Chapter 365. The Bardi Empire's capital was probably the city with the longest history out of all the mega empires out there. It was the country's origin, and even the empire was named after it. That's right, the name of the Bardi Empire's capital was Bardi. In order to distinguish it from the country's name, the Bardi people would habitually refer to their capital as the capital. Outsiders would also refer to it as the Bardi Empire's capital. The Bardi Empire's capital covered an area of nearly 1,000 square kilometers, including several dozen small and medium-sized satellite cities. There were even rivers and mountains. If someone wanted to walk from the city to the capital to meet Emperor Orlos, they would need to prepare enough food and tents to last them for half a month. The largest district in the capital wasn't the Dillo district where the royal palace was located. That district was far too heavily guarded. Orlos, who had made so many enemies, had turned that district into the number 1 military district in the Bardi Empire. Not to mention, all the princes who often fought amongst themselves lived there. Anyone with even the slightest bit of political sensitivity wouldn't choose to go there. During the day, all the carriages on the wide roads would have the family emblem of a certain noble or official. If anyone stayed here for too long, a patrolling knight would come over. Even so, the rate of major crimes occurring here was still the highest in the entire Bardi Empire. As Emperor Orlos, who was too old and eager to see a truly qualified successor, remained silent about the princes infighting and killing each other, as if he was tacitly approving of it, this district became even more chaotic. Princes often had the support of gangs, major merchants, and nobles, so they wouldn't personally take action. This made assassins and spies the most common jobs here, and it was already a habit for those in this profession to kill off any witnesses. Thus, it became an unspoken rule of the Bardi Empire's capital to never enter the Dillo district, which was commonly known as the Royal Palace, after sunset. As a result, a rather strange situation occurred. During the day, the streets here would be packed with people and carriages, but at night, the streets would be completely empty. However, black-clothed individuals and cloaked individuals would still be on the roofs of various houses, and they would even greet each other. Oh, isn't this the 4th Prince's Grand Knight Karma? Where are you going this time? Of course it's because Lord 13 recently recruited another Archmage. I heard that he's so powerful that he's affecting the balance of power. My boss wants me to test him out, and if he's weak, I'll directly kill him. If he's really powerful, I'll teach him the rules of our profession. What a coincidence, my mission is also the same. Let's go together. Of course, there will be plenty of rewards for completing the quest in a team. Why would you want to do it alone? Isn't that a little silly? By the way, I heard that guy has some skills. Do you have any information on him? Let's share. A black-cloaked man and a gray-cloaked man started chatting. Looking at how they agreed to go and farm bosses together, they were practically a pair of good friends. However, outsiders would probably never imagine that the black-clothed man's left eye had been blinded by the gray-cloaked man. In that battle, the gray-cloaked man had also lost his left pinky and middle fingers. Not only were they not friends, they were mortal enemies who had been fighting each other just yesterday. Let's go together. Together. Take turns on him. The two of them turned around and saw a black cloak, a red cloak, and a purple mask. It seemed like the party of 5 was about to be filled up. Tonight, they were going to fight the Instance dungeon boss. And these members of Shinran's team, who had been fighting each other like crazy yesterday, had become companions today. Perhaps tomorrow, they would see the corpses of half of their members in the gutter, and it was likely that these temporary teammates would be the cause of half of their members' deaths. After all, every thug with a bit of fame would have a tempting bounty on them. Third-rate assassins, gangsters, bodyguards of wealthy businessmen, unruly deserters, and even hooligans and black market fighters could be seen here. You could probably see all the underworld forces that you could think of. As the Emperor's death drew closer and closer, the degree of acquiescence became more and more relaxed. In fact, even the night patrol squadron was withdrawn at night. The result was that the competition between the princes had become white-hot and obvious. They spent large amounts of money to hire thugs, regardless of their background or strength. As long as they could complete their mission and survive, they were naturally good dogs that were worth spending money on. Yes, good dogs. The people in other parts of the capital called this increasingly brutal internal conflict within the royal family dog fights. The princes stood on high platforms and tossed gold coins at the people below them to kill each other. Wasn't this the same as the dog fights that were popular in certain regions? And yet, this dog fight involved more and more people, to the point where it seemed like it was going to engulf the entire capital. There's no sign of life at all. Holy Light's healing is completely ineffective. He could die at any moment. This was secretly leaked by a certain royal physician, and on the afternoon that he received a large sum of gold coins as a reward, he was taken away by the Royal Knight Squadron and executed on the same night. The healing effect of Holy Light, in the end, was to return the victim to a normal state. That was why it was effective against external injuries and ordinary poisoned wounds. However, it was practically useless against reconstructing a limb after it had been severed for a period of time. That was because Holy Light would judge that the person was already in a normal state, so how could it change again? And for dead people like the undead who were filled with negative energy, Holy Light, which could return the victim to a normal state, would naturally be their mortal enemy. For the same reason, if someone died of old age due to their life force failing, their normal state would be that they were on the verge of death. They would be hanging on to their last breath with medicine. Of course, Holy Light would be completely useless. Blindly using Holy Light to activate the last of the victim's life force would only cause them to die even faster. From a certain standpoint, when Holy Light was no longer effective on an elderly or sick person, it would be a death notice in a different sense. Although the Bardi Royal Knights had acted quite quickly and immediately destroyed the source of this information and blocked the spread of this information, this also proved the veracity of this piece of information in a way. And so, while all the princes and princes were in a frenzy of joy and madness, the various nobles and important figures of various industries in the Bardi Empire could no longer just sit back and watch the dogs fight. After all, it was obvious that a new emperor was about to succeed to the throne. It was now time for them to place their bets and personally take the throne. The rewards of helping an emperor ascend to the throne would be enough to make any merchant bet their entire family's wealth and life. And for the nobles, this was also a huge gamble. If they won, their status and title would explosively increase, and they might even gain great power. But if they lost, actually, it wouldn't matter much to the major nobles. They would just be greatly disliked by the new emperor. However, the major nobles with large territories would actually be less likely to be hated by the new emperor. As long as they didn't make a deep grudge against the new emperor, they could just obediently scram back to their territories and hide like turtles. It would be fine for them to keep their tails between their legs in the future. When the major nobles, merchants, and even the leaders of the military and civil service all took action, although the current emperor was still alive and the country was still relatively stable on the surface, if the entire upper echelons took action as well, the internal situation would be in complete chaos. Fortunately, with Emperor Orlos's ruthless methods and prestige, the nobles still didn't dare to tear apart the layer of paper on the surface and limit the chaos to the royal palace. How was this possible? If chaos could really be controlled, then the Chaos faction would have made peace with the Order faction long ago. Although the nobles said that they couldn't affect the citizens of other places, the major merchants would use their merchant guilds to attack their competitors. This would cause the entire market to violently fluctuate. The Grey factions under the control of the nobles would take action. Just a small thug would be able to cause chaos in an entire alley, and not to mention the fact that a single move by the military would cause half a city's citizens to be in a state of panic and unable to sleep. The citizens were no idiot. This was especially so when murders happened every few days, or when a noble who had been doing quite well in the past was suddenly found dead on the street. Rumors would naturally spread like wildfire. At some unknown point in time, the news that Emperor Orlos was about to die was no longer a secret. Even though the ordinary citizens could understand why Emperor Orlos was using such a special method to find a suitable successor, how could the ordinary citizens hope for a peaceful life like this to continue, especially since they were currently in the midst of war? That's right, war was currently in the middle of a chaotic war against multiple countries. The so-called vanguard of the Holy War had already been half destroyed by the rampaging dragons. However, they still existed within the Bardi Empire's borders. It was as if the common people had forgotten about them. Meanwhile, there was good news for Nitrain City's defensive line. Due to a certain person's outrageous actions, the undead lords and their armies that were close to Davi had all been wiped out. Until a new undead leader arrived or was appointed, as well as until the undead lords who hadn't participated in the allied armies had finished shirking their responsibilities, Nitrain City's defensive line would be temporarily stabilized. Once the contract heroes on the western battlefront had time to spare, they would naturally be able to reinforce the eastern battlefront. Nitrain City would enter a period of stability, and it was only during this period that the Dragon Knight Archduke Carwins dared to go about his own business. As for the final target of war, the Mage Country, that's right, they were still at war. At least on the surface, the Mage Country had used a forbidden spell to destroy one of Bardi's fortresses. Dragon Knight and Archmages from both sides were still fighting on the front lines. Since there was no agreement on paper yet, it was only natural that both sides were still at war. In fact, since the Mage Country had won all the battles in the Bardi Empire, many citizens who had lost their loved ones in the fortresses raised flags and asked their rulers to help them attack the Mage Country. Not only that, there were also people who used propaganda against the Mage Country to vent the citizens' anxiety and fear. This made the citizens even more hostile towards the Mage Country. As for an actual attack, even if the Mage Country didn't know the true situation, just the fact that the successor to the Mage Country's crown had yet to be decided meant that none of the major figures were willing to waste their energy on such a thankless task. And in such a precarious situation, Cher's arrival here as the Mage Country's ambassador naturally attracted a lot of attention. It wasn't enough for a capital city to only be a political center. The Queso district was the center of commerce and education. It was more than 3 times the size of the Royal Palace district. In the 30-some years since Orlos took the throne, the Queso district had become increasingly prosperous. In the past, merchants from various countries would gather there. It was also the most prosperous district in the Bardi Empire. In order to avoid conflicts that would make people feel helpless, especially when a certain prince colluded with a foreign spy to murder his own brother and failed, all diplomatic embassies were moved to the business district near the Royal Palace district. When considering the current situation, Cher's arrival was indeed quite low-key. She used the cover of night to secretly enter a hotel. However, her status made it impossible for her to keep a low profile. A horse-drawn carriage with the Mage Country's emblem would travel between the business district and the Royal Palace district several times a day, and the carriage would stop at a hotel for foreign envoys to stay in. Naturally, even ordinary citizens would learn that an enemy country's ambassador had arrived. And so, the city's rotten eggs and rotten fruits were sold out. From the Bardi citizens' perspective, this was quite easy to understand. They also needed a way to vent their dissatisfaction. And so, every time the horse-drawn carriage passed through the city, it would be like whack-a-mole. Some youths who weren't satisfied even chased the carriage all the way to the hotel. Although the guards at the hotel's entrance wouldn't let them in, they would simply toss some harmless rotten fruits at them. The guards, who were just as displeased with the Mage Country, would pretend that they didn't see anything. The end result was that cannons could be heard outside, and no one dared to go near the windows of the hotel. Even in such a situation, the other members of the Mage Country's envoy group were quite calm. However, Cher, as the ambassador, was quite confused. "Why are you all so calm?" Answer: "We're used to being scammed." Roland's old subordinates were already used to being scammed. However, Cher was filled with frustration. "Even though I'm just an ordinary mage working in the Bardi Empire's disciplinary department, and I didn't even pass the Archmage assessment, I was mysteriously appointed as an ambassador by my superiors. I was sent to a hostile capital. I had a secret agreement, but I couldn't announce it. My temporary residence's windows were all destroyed, and it was so cold at night. Every day, the old emperor there would ask me to discuss official matters with him, but I was forced to play chess with him. Not only that, the emperor's chess skills were so terrible, and he always reneged on his moves. If it weren't for the fact that the Bardi Empire and the Bardi Empire's relationship was such that a war might really break out, Cher would have been unable to restrain herself long ago. How could I possibly restrain myself? I've had enough. I'm done. All right then, Cher, who didn't have a good temper, was already furious. However, what she couldn't restrain the most was, even though we agreed that I'm only a puppet ambassador on the surface, and that Vice Ambassador Roland should be in charge of all the work, why did he disappear right after we left? In the end, all the work fell to me. I've already had enough trouble on my way here, and now there's so much to do. How can someone be so irresponsible?" Such a familiar roar of anger, such a familiar complaint. Kolos had a sympathetic expression as she looked at Cher, who was now in a state of anxiety. It seemed that anyone who spent a lot of time with Roland would come here for several days every month. "I've seen my past self." Lilith fell into deep thought as she looked at the chaos outside the window. Was the past self she mentioned referring to the royal princess who was viewed as an enemy by the Bardi Empire's citizens, or the pitiful internal affairs head steward who had been constantly busy all day after her superiors gave her countless jobs in Sulphur Mountain City and had no hope for her colleagues at all? "Relax, Sister Cher. Teacher will probably arrive soon. He probably won't forget such a major incident, probably." As Cher's disciple, Cohen still had to protect his teacher's honor. However, when he thought about how unreliable his teacher was, he ended up revealing his lack of confidence in his teacher. "What a chaotic place, Miss Yon. His Highness Roland told me that this is an ancient empire in the mortal world. They're slow to react to new things and are arrogant. Their prejudice against the dark elves hasn't changed at all. According to ancient customs, the Bardi Empire will first burn down the dark elves in the city before investigating them. Judging from this, the Bardi Empire is basically a group of uncivilized barbarians who have no sympathy whatsoever. Eaglestorm started talking nonstop. However, Momo, who had been transferred over to help Yuan due to a lack of manpower, was looking at him with anticipation. Did he expect this situation? Did he mention me? Did he say what he wanted me to do? Fine, I'll get straight to the point. If they want to enforce the law on the streets, tell them that this isn't their territory. Pretending to be law enforcers and harming others is also a serious crime. They should know what it's like for law enforcers to break the law. He even thought of that, but he didn't think of our current situation. The law faction's restless members calmed down after hearing Roland's message. However, the most troublesome one was the current ambassador of the mage country, who was about to go insane from the pressure. She had just played 3 hours of crappy chess against a lousy chess player who kept reneging on his move. She had even been baptized by an egg storm on the way back. Her rationality was on the verge of collapsing. Now that she heard Roland's name, she immediately exploded. I've had enough. I don't want to be the ambassador anymore. I'm returning to the mortal world right now. Cohen, who still had a bit of a conscience, hesitated for a moment before finally persuading Roland. Then Sister Shirley, you should first say goodbye to His Majesty Emperor Roland. That means that our carriage will have to pass through the city again. I don't know if they still have any ammunition. There's a shortage of fruits here every day. Right, it's almost nightfall. Those strange creatures running around on the roofs are about to come out again. It's highly likely that our carriage will be ambushed. Sister Shirley, do you intend to wear a mask as well? Actually, I still have some leftover masks from last time. Little Cohen, has anyone ever told you that you're just as annoying as your master? Alright then, the ambassador had completely exploded. However, cough cough. Eaglestorm, who was the elder here, cleared his throat and looked at Shirley with a sympathetic gaze. His Highness Roland's exact words are, if Shirley refuses to take on this responsibility, then tell her that she can forget about receiving any research funding for the next 50 years. She'll fail all her research evaluations, and there's also the daily task of cleaning toilets that her superiors must do. That's right, this is bullying. You're welcome to complain about your superiors when you return to the headquarters. Yep, just complain to Roland, who just took over as the head of the discipline department. He's your superior's 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 superior. Damned Roland. I even thought that you were a good person. Alright, this was still such a familiar roar, causing everyone present to involuntarily sink into their memories. If Roland was a god who hated divine concepts, then with his power of making others hate him, he should be a main god by now.